Hello and good evening. Tonight's gentle journey takes us to how people cooked in medieval times. A gentle bedtime journey. Lower the volume, rest your eyes, and let the past be your lullaby. If this brings you peace, consider liking and subscribing only if it truly helps. And share in the comments where you're joining us from and the hour there. Now, lights down, a soft fan if you have one, and let's begin our walk through history. Step with me into a long timber hall where the beams are tar dark from years of smoke, and the air is warm on your cheeks before we cross the threshold. At the center lies the reason the building breathes an open hearth, alive with a deliberate fire. Wood snaps, embers wink, and a heavy iron pot swings on its chain, whispering with a stew that knows onions and barley by heart, and, unfortunate days, a ribbon of pork. Life here speaks in the language of flame. You shuffle nearer because your toes complain, and the fire answers them, doing 3 jobs before you've named one. It dries cloaks by the trestle, lifts the chill from damp wool, warms water for ale, and if you ask the old stories, keeps ill luck at the threshold. Sparks hop and die on the hard-packed earth. Someone has banked one corner with ash, a quiet insurance policy for the night to come. Look upward. The hearth is not tucked against a wall, but planted in the middle of the room, so everybody can share heat and light. Above, the roof rises high and dark. A smoke vent in the thatch, the Louvre, invites the haze to climb and leave, and sometimes it does. More often, the smoke behaves like weather, drifting sideways, pooling under the rafters, turning the hall into a gray sea that stings eyes and perfumes hair, wool, and rushes. The plan endures because it works. One great room, a central blaze, a roof that breathes equal access to warmth and work, with meat hanging above to cure in the haze. When the wind helps, the smoke goes. When it will not, people endure. Listen soft pops when barley surrenders, a log shifting its weight, the faint sigh of the chain. A wooden spoon has lived a hard life here, scorched to a gloss, flavored by yesterday's leek. This is cooking by instinct, a handful of grain, a scrubbed root, a splash of ale, a pinch of salt if the jar is kind. Nobody measures. They judge by eye, ear, and the way a smell ripens. Look around. Boards on trestles, a settle by the warmest draft. Children watch the orange theater on the walls. The fire tells stories without words. The hall doubles as workshop shoes steamed soft for mending, skeins drying, a pot for scalding, another for washing. This is not a separate kitchen. This is a life, and the fire threads through all of it. The air tastes of resin and onion. Step outside and back in, and you will notice the house scent, the smoky perfume that clings to hair and sleeps in the rushes. It follows people into church, into market, into bed. Overhead, ribs and sausages share the rafters with loops of onions and bundles of herbs. Smoke is seasoning, preservative, disinfectant, and superstition at once. Watch the management of flame. There are no matches. Fire must be kept, not summoned. At night, the embers are buried under ash so the household can wake to a living core, breathed back into flame with kindling and patience. If the fire dies, the morning begins with flint and a steel and persistence. Everything bends to the hearth's moods. The best seat faces the glow. A brewing tub waits at the edge of heat so ale can prove and bread can rise. The pot is hoisted higher or lower to find the right temper of flame. The open hearth has its weather. In autumn, it is generous. In spring, it sulks with damp wood. In winter, it is hunger made visible. People read it like sailors read a sky, a shift in the draft, a sudden hiss, a bed of stubborn coals, kindling weights, split logs lean to dry. Every gesture at the fire is both craft and caution. The stew is the everyday republic. Into it go the certainty's onion, barley, leek, and the uncertain yesterday's bone, a spoon of fat, a turnip rescued from frost. On lucky days, a scrap of meat deepens the pot. Bread waits for its roll as trencher and a sponge, a dense rye or barley loaf meant to meet broth halfway and soften. The pot offers to all, the commons is literal, and the room is a stage for talk. By this heat, news unrolls who calved, who sickened, who needs help before the weather turns. The day is put away here, voices soften as the light drains from the door. Not everyone breathes this ease. The sting of smoke catches whoever leans and stirs. A baby is turned to the cleaner air near the floor. An elder coughs and grumbles that the wind is wrong. There is talk of chimneys in the stone houses, tall, costly, said to draw smoke like a priest's prayer. Not here, not yet. Here the roof learns to drink the haze, and the family learns to sit in the stream the wind permits. The hall teaches patience. Cook with time instead of temperature, attention instead of gadgets. Plan the day around what heat can do and what light allows. Remember to soak the barley at noon. Forgive lateness with an extra ladle of ale. Carelessness earns a spark in the rushes or a blistered thumb. The lessons are old and daily. Step once more to the fire's edge. Hold your hands as countless hands have done and feel the practical mercy of heat. Watch the smoke lift toward the louver, negotiate a beam, and curl back like a thought that won't leave. This is the architecture of a survival hearth in the middle. Roof that breathes badly but enough, pot that keeps its promises, family arranged in rings of warmth. Modern kitchens are bright descendants with clever lungs and easy switches. But this is the parent. Stay just to memorize textures iron polished by years of stirring, wood burnished by hands, soot on your fingertips when you brush a rafter, a ladle nicked at the rim. The door breathes cold in and warm out. Someone turns the eschew, judges it done by the way the spoon stands a moment and grants a small nod. Supper is ready. The hall glows as if pleased with itself. Outside, stars. Inside, steam that smells like comfort. If your eyes water, it is not only the smoke. It is the old recognition that ordinary life was made possible right here by tending a troublesome fire until it behaved like a friend, by trusting a pot to carry a day's labor into evening, by gathering close enough to share heat and hunger both. The rafters keep their counsel, the stew keeps its promise, and the night, for once, is willing to be kind. You blink through the haze and realize the next lesson is not heat, but breath. How did people cook when the house itself was a lung that never fully exhaled? Walk with me into cottages of timber and daub, roofs shaggy with thatch, windows narrow as eyelids. There is no brick throat to carry a smoke skyward. The hearth sits open in the middle. The roof above offers a louvre or simple hole. On good days, the wind behaves and lifts the smoke out. On bad days, it puddles and stings. This is the ordinary architecture of early centuries. The whole house breathes from the top, not the side. Rafters are glossed with soot. Joints are chinked against winter by what the smoke itself has given an oily skin that seals cracks and darkens timber to velvet black. The air bites but keeps insects modest and hams secure. Look up meat, cheeses in cloth, herbs in bundles, they all take their turn in the weather of a smoke, cured by patience as much as by fire. People adapt their height to survive. Children learn quickly that the cleanest air is close to the floor. Adults crouch. Elders claim the bench where the draft is kindest. Eyes water, voices rasp, and yet the work continues. You will see contrivances meant to coax the haze upward. Reed mats hung like sails, wooden hoods on chains, crude baffles at an angle, little inventions that make smoke think in straight lines. Sometimes they work, sometimes the room wins. Weather has moods. A still frost heaps the haze under the beams. A south wind snatches it away. Rain pushes it down until you cook with your face in your sleeve. There are days when you must choose between dinner and clearer air. Most households choose dinner. They bank the fire smaller, keep the pot low, and let the hall become weather again. Many families share a space with animals for heat and safety buyers at one end. People at the other, divided by nothing sturdier than habit. The animals breathe too, a stew of smells wood smoke, wool, damp earth. Cattle settles into walls and clothing until it reads as home. Without glass, windows are tiny. A shutter is opened to vent only when the rain goes sideways and no one minds a puddle. Light and air arrive together and rarely when you want them. Chimneys exist, but as dreams for the poor and experiments for the rich. In great houses, you may find a corner hearth with a timber or stone hood that lodges smoke into a smoke bay, a vertical chamber pretending to be a chimney. Elsewhere, masons raise real stone stacks for lords and towns that can afford brick. Those shafts change the world inside. Suddenly rooms can be smaller, warmer, and separate. Sleep can climb a ladder without suffocating. Yet for most cottages, the central hearth remains the rule. Coughs are the background instrument of the hall. People complain of thick air after storms and of thatched roofs that weep and hiss when the wind drives rain under the eaves, dousing the fire and forcing the smoke to kneel on the floor. Still, the flame is tended as tenderly as a child. Embers are banked beneath ash at night. A neighbor with a live coal is nearer kin than any cousin. Flint, steel, and tinder live in a dry nook like a little chapel against disaster. Belief attaches itself to the haze. Smoke is a protection as well as a nuisance. It smokes out pests. It smokes in blessings. Herbs tossed into the fire at certain seasons promise health or luck, and the smell of juniper or rosemary braided with the usual oak or beech makes the hall feel briefly like a chapel. When the wind is perverse, someone mutters about spirits not yet appeased, and another throws a pinch of salt on the coals just in case. Fuel changes the recipe. Where woodland thins, people burn peat earth that burns like memory. In uplands, gorse and heather snap quickly and teach cooks the art of speed. Boil hard while you can. Then swing the pot higher and let carryover heat finish the job. Wood, peat, furs, brush, each has a temperament. Each gives its own smoke and orders its own kitchen. Step into a richer house, a stone underfoot. Larger windows and you feel the future arrive. An enclosed fireplace bites its smoke and sends it up a built throat. A hood of a stone draws so well that a cook can stand upright to stir. Soot remains, but as accent, not occupation. Hanging meat tastes less of ash. Ceilings can be lime-washed and expected to stay pale. The price is coin and wood. Enclosed fires eat fuel and demand hands to keep them fed. None of this changes the peasant cottage quickly. There, management is the skill tending the fire small but sufficient, choosing when to open the shutter, knowing which corner has the kind draft, training children to crawl before they walk through the haze. Mothers learn to stir with one hand and shield a baby's face with the other. Men learn to patch the thatch where a spark has chewed through. Everyone learns where to cough and where to breathe. Storm nights are a chapter of their own. Listen to rain drum on thatch, to the thread-thin leak that hisses when it meets the fire. The hall darkens and the smoke settles low enough to taste. Supper becomes a stoic, a smaller flame, thicker stew, quicker eating, earlier bed. Someone pushes the pot to the coal's edge to keep it alive till morning. Someone else lays out the flint in case the weather steals the last ember. And yet, ask an old woman in such a house whether she wishes for a chimney, and she may smile without answering. The smoke has mothered her hams and guarded her cheese and colored her rafters the black of age and honor. It has stung her eyes and blessed her walls. Complaints live side by side with pride. A clean room is a new room. A black room is an old friend. So we come to understand that cooking without a chimney is not a failure of design, but a different contract with fire. The roof helps when it can. The wind negotiates. The family adjusts. Meals happen anyway. A pot finds its simmer. Bread finds the edge of heat where it will rise. Children find the low air. Elders find the bench with the kind draft. The room looks like weather and feels like endurance. One day, not today, a mason will arrive with chalk and a string and mark a corner for a proper stack. Soot-dulled beams will watch a new throat climb skyward. Rooms will divide. Smoke will be taught a single road. The hall will become a house with places. For now, the sky is the chimney. The Louvre is the compromise. And supper is the reason to suffer. Blink, cough, laugh, eat. In the end, even the smoke belongs to the recipe. Your gaze slips from the rafters to the fire's rim, where the household's little army leans and glints and waits. In a place without countertops or cupboards, tools live like pets, close to heat, close to hands, blackened by years of work. The first you touch is clay, a squat pipkin with 3 nubby legs so it can stand steady among embers, its mouth chipped where a lid once knocked too hard. The surface is rough as a heel, smoke burnished to a deep brown, and along one side a faint seam shows where 2 palms once pressed and smoothed it into being. Clay holds a gentle heat. It forgives a rolling boil. It is cheap. And when it betrays you with a crack, you take it to the tinker who binds the wound shut with iron staples. A humble surgery that lets stew find its simmer again. Next to it squats the iron cauldron, queen of the hearth, belly wide, lip thick, legs as stumpy as a stool's. Sometimes she hangs from an adjustable trammel, a toothed iron strap that bites higher or lower on the chimney hook. Sometimes she sits squarely in the coals, ash haloed around her feet. She is heavy with the memory of meals barley grown fat and soft, beans surrendering to mash, scraps of bacon rendering their consolation into the broth. When you set your ear near her flank, You hear her small, steady language, plop, sigh, plop. From time to time, a skimmer perforated like a little moon is dipped to chase scum from the top, and a flesh hook tests a bone for its looseness. An iron finger asking, "Are you ready to fall?" Iron travels into every shape the fire demands. See the long-handled frying pan, bowl shallow, handle absurdly long so your skin can stay shy of sparks. With it, a cook learns courage. The hiss of fat is both invitation and warning. On a day of luck, there are eggs. On more usual days, batter oat, barley. Whatever grain will pour thin and brave onto hot iron becomes a quick cake. Another pan has 3 legs like a spider, so you can set it into coals while keeping its belly clean of ash. A gridiron, bars running like ribs, waits for fish and toasting bread, while a flat baked stone, as smooth as a river pebble, becomes a field for oat cakes that lift and freckle when the heat is right. Tool by tool, the hearth builds its grammar. There's the mortar and pestle, stone or bronze, heavy with a strength of wrists, mustard seed, salt crystals, garlic, hazelnuts. Everything hard is persuaded into paste here. The rhythm is patient, almost meditative, a heartbeat made by hand thud, thud, thud. Children grow up to that sound, the scent of bruised parsley or fennel riding the smoke, the promise that tonight the pot will not only fill but also taste. Wood is everywhere, treen bowls and trenchers cut from beech or ash, smoothed by years of spoons, hold whatever the cauldron yields. Ladles are carved from a knot where the grain curves into a perfect bowl. Handles are scorched at the tip from too bold dipping. A single family ladle serves a democracy of hunger, moving from pot to mouth and back again with a minimum of a ceremony. Spoons, big and little, go black at their noses where they repeatedly kiss the boil. If one snaps at a weak point, a new one is carved after dark at the hearth side. Curls of pale wood falling like feathers to the floor. Knives rule both kitchen and table. One broad blade for hacking through joints and roots, one narrow for finer work, and a scattering of small eating knives that live sheathed at belts, veering between tool and cutlery as needed. On a beam near the door hangs the whetstone, worn to a saddle with years of care. A cook draws a steel along stone the way a fiddler tunes a string, small corrections that keep the day from going wrong. With the edge set, a cabbage yields its ribs, an onion gives up its rings, a loaf breaks its crust with a crisp sigh that makes everyone turn their heads. A shelf near the smoke is for jugs and pitchers, clay-bellied and tight-lipped, some wax-sealed with cloth, a few glazed a mossy green that flashes when the fire flares. Ale, buttermilk, whey, broth, each finds a home there. For travel, there's a castrol, a flat-sided flask with loops for the string, good against the hip. For feast, a mazer, a wooden drinking bowl rubbed to a shy shine. Baskets wicker and rush breathe onions and apples. Tubs and keeler troughs keep water handy for steeping barley or washing greens. A sieve of horsehair leans nearby to catch the husks when grain is rinsed. There are the specialist items you notice only once you know to look. A peel along a flat paddle waits like a slender oar for the day the family carries dough to the communal oven. A small toasting fork perches by the coals for reviving stale bread. A pair of tongs' black jaws, pit-scarred, rescue a coal that is skittered where it shouldn't. In a wealthier room, you might see a chain of pot hooks like a family of fish. Each hook a different length so the cook can fine-tune the height of a pot to the heat. Heat becoming a measurable thing rather than only a feeling in the face. Somewhere too, a salt box keeps its treasure dry, hung high where damp can't spoil the day's seasoning. Decoration survives the drudgery. Archaeologists would someday find cauldrons with molded faces and pots stamped with simple rosettes, small jokes and quiet pride baked into the gear of work. Even a skimmer might wear a pattern of holes in a star or a cross. A pan's handle might end in a fishtail flourish. Not every household owned such prettiness, but whenever beauty could hitch a ride on necessity, it did. A cook is a maker twice over. Repairs thread the room like a second history. That pot whose lip failed last winter now wears neat iron stitches. The frying pan's bottom shows the hammered circles of a smith who returned it to flat. Handles are wrapped where they split. Lids gain wire loops where the original wood burned away. Nothing is thrown out easily. Tinkers wander the lanes with a bell and a kit, trading their sharp tongues and sharper awls for coins or a meal. The kitchen becomes a museum of endurance, usefulness, outranking symmetry every time. All this lives in a space that is not quite a kitchen, the way you mean it. There's no separate room, no larder behind a door with a latch. Tools share ground with spinning wheel and stool, with boots drying on pegs and a cradle rocked with a foot, while hands shred cabbage. The best seat is whichever one lets you reach the pot without losing your eyebrows. Order is a choreography, not a blueprint. The pan is over there by the dog. The knife is where it always is, on the beam. The spoon is in the pot. Look with your hand. Listen. And the room plays its orchestra, iron kissing a stone, pestle keeping time, blade whispering through leek leaves, lids clacking, fat ticking on hot metal, chain links murmuring as a pot is raised an inch, someone's breath counting the seconds between bubble and bubble. Even quiet jobs have sound, the sigh of cloth as it strains broth, the sifting hush of flour through a sieve, the sand scrape of cleaning a pot once supper's gone. If the hall is the family's heart, these noises are its murmurs. Heat teaches manners and tricks. Long handles keep skin from blisters. A trivet lifts a pan just enough to stop the scorch. Green wood spatulas don't char as fast as dry ones. Fuel teaches. To peat smolders gentle and steady. Gorse pleads for speed. Hardwood builds deep beds of coals that let you bake a flatbread right on ash, flicking it to hear the drum that says done. A seasoned cook can glance at a hearth and know three temperatures at once: the fierce center for boiling, the mellow ring for simmering, and the quiet fringe for keeping. When night pulls people close, eating gear appears. Trenchers, thick slabs of yesterday's bread become plates and sponges at once. A shared bowl sits where elbows can reach without quarrel. The same knives that cut kindling carve the meat, and mugs that held mash at noon hold ale at dusk. The division between cooking tool and tableware is as thin as a knife's edge. The same objects commute between labor and comfort without ceremony. You cannot miss the economy in all of this, an ethic of enough. The gear list feels short, almost austere fire. 1 or 2 good pots, a pan, knives, spoons, a ladle, a mortar, a few bowls, a jug or 3. Yet out of those few come stews that sustain, breads that lift supper into plenty, little pancakes that make children grin, sauces that surprise a tongue tired of winter. Gaps are bridged by wit. A broken pot becomes a storage jar. A cracked bowl holds salt. A warped lid becomes a tray for drying herbs. Step back and the picture resolves. Nothing gleams, nothing matches, everything works. Soot is a color, burn marks are a memory, and the line between tool and companion blurs the longer you sit here. The cook reaches for things by instinct, as though they volunteered themselves, this pestle for mustard, that spoon for tasting, that pan for batter because everyone knows batter favors it. Modern kitchens envy this choreography and then smother it with drawers. Here the dance stays simple what you use, lives where you can reach it. What you need is what you own. Before the fire sinks, the ladle knocks twice against the cauldron and is left inside insurance for midnight and morning. The knife gets a last slow kiss along the whetstone and slides home in its sheath. Clay cools, iron sighs, wood returns to the color of sleep. In the dark, the room is a silhouette of handles and legs and hooks, an alphabet of work waiting for a new sentence at dawn. When the first stick snaps and the coals wake to orange, the tools will take their places again. Their small, sure music is starting the day before anyone speaks. Follow the lane to the edge of the village and the air changes, less smoke and cabbage, more warm yeast and sun-baked clay. The building you're approaching is low and plain, half buried in ash, with a squat, domed oven jutting from its side like the shell of some heavy creature. This is the bakehouse, the village's small sun, and on baking days people orbit it, women with baskets at their hips, men with wood bundles for the fire, children bouncing on toes for a heel of crust still too hot to hold. Long before kitchens sprouted neat ranges and knobs, heat lived here in one concentrated blaze, shared and rationed with care. Dough does not begin its life at the oven. It is born in troughs at home, in a corner by the hearth. Flour is lifted from sacks, rye, barley, or maslin, that thrifty blend of wheat and rye, and wetted with yesterday's leaven, or with barm skimmed from the ale vat. A wooden may, the kneading trough, creaks as elbows drive grain into glue. Salt ground in a mortar is pinched over the top, and a cross is cut lightly into the dough, more blessing than recipe. You can hear the slap of it against the board, the short huffs of a body measuring time without a clock. It swells under cloth, grows faintly warm from its own breath, and is finally shaped into loaves that are neither dainty nor uniform, but honest, round and heavy. Each one is marked a deep slash, a family sign, a thumbprint, because once the oven door closes, distinctions blur, and only the baker's memory and those notches will send bread home to the right mouths. Fuel is dear. Whole villages burn fewer logs if they bake together, which is why the oven is public in spirit even when it is private in ownership. In many places, the oven belongs to lord or abbey. To use it is to pay for it, a coin slipped to the keeper, or a portion of dough surrendered as fee. In some towns, the right to bake at home is frowned upon or fined. The great oven must earn its keep. No one says this aloud while baskets line the wall and gossip travels like sparks. But everyone knows it. Bread is food, and bread is order. The keeper rakes the fire forward and back with a long iron rake, the oven's throat glowing dull red, then bright, then white. When the walls have swallowed enough heat, the fire is dragged out, embers shoveled to a pit, where children are warned not to stare too long into the orange. A bundle of wet bracken or a mop of rag tied to a pole swabs the floor, hissing, the steam sweet and mineral. Some test the heat with a pinch of flour, watching for the speed of the scorch. Others throw in a scrap of paper or a twig to judge by smell. There's a moment, a stillness, when the keeper nods. They sign that today's heat is right for bread and not yet fallen to the gentler temperatures of beans and pies. Loaves slide in on the peel, a long-handled paddle smooth as a river stone. The motion is a dance, quick forward thrust, a small twist, a jerk that places the round exactly where the floor is cleanest. The door thick, soot shiny, plugs the mouth, and with it, whole households are sealed inside together. Outside, nothing to do but wait. Talk rises in a dozen pitches whose cow calved, whether the reeve will be as strict about gleaning this year, what the miller kept back in multure, his lawful cut that always seems too large. Children chase each other around a heap of faggots and are shushed for scattering chips. A dog, strong with the smell of stale gravy, sneaks closer, pretending not to covet anyone's basket. There is law in bread, in towns. Weights and prices bend to the grain market. Under the assize of bread and ale, if wheat grows dear, your loaf grows light instead of your coin getting heavier. Bakers who cheat risk the pillory, bad loaves strung about their necks like a wreath of shame. To leave no room for error, some offer a baker's dozen, 13 for 12, the kindness of caution. Out here, beneath a thatch of smoke, the assize is a rumor that arrives when it likes. Yet even the countryside knows that bread must be weighed somehow by fairness, if not by scale. The smell that pushes through the oven door is the nearest thing to ceremony most people will know. When it opens at last, heat blooms into the lane and the first loaves carry that sound, the thin, crisp crackle of crust fissering as cool air touches it. A child yelps because he's touched too soon. An old woman laughs without looking up, already sliding her loaves onto her cloth. The keeper calls out marks like a priest reading names. One by one, rounds roll home, a village's breakfast cooling on its own heartbeat. Not all bread is the same bread, and your mouth knows it. For the prosperous, there's wastel or pain de main, fine white wheat sifted of bran and grit, a crumb cloud soft and almost sweet, saved for feast days or guests. For most, there's the everyday brown rye, barley, maslin the crust darker, the bite chewier. It's a strength honest and welcome. In lean years, peas and beans creep into the flour, and on the harshest days, acorn meal leached of bitterness with many waters will be worked in so bellies feel full, even when cupboards don't. Teeth tell these stories later. Stone dust from hand-milled grain writes a hard alphabet in enamel, a slow record of meals that fed and wore down in the same swallow. Bread refuses waste. Yesterday's loaf becomes today's trencher, a thick plate that soaks a stew's fat and then becomes part of the meal or is handed through a door to a beggar waiting in patience. Old bread becomes a sops, softened with broth or ale to comfort a sick stomach. Heels are toasted on a fork over coals until the room smells faintly of caramel and smoke, and someone says, as they always do, that the best part of a loaf is its end. On feast days, dough is braided or pricked with patterns, anise planted like the stars. At mid-Lent, simnel boiled and baked is a dense promise. At All Souls, little soul cakes pass from hand to hand. At Yule, a rich loaf lingers on the board like a companion for the longest night. Watch the oven's day unfold, and you learn its thrift. Bread first, while the heat is at its fiercest. Then, as the clay cools to a steady pulse, pies and pasties, coffins of thick pastry that keep meat moist and safe. Later, when the temperature has fallen to kindness, beans and custards, then herbs to dry, then apples to take on a whisper of smoke for winter. Nothing wastes the embers a human being carried from the forest in aching arms. A good keeper knows how to spend heat the way a careful merchant spends silver. In towns, professional bakers take the work from household arms and sell their skill under signs carved with sheaves or a crescent loaf. Their benches are dusted constantly, their peels nicked at the edge from long use, their ledgers busy with marks beside names. Out here, the bakehouse knits the village. People who quarrel at market stand elbow to elbow at the oven, and secrets are kept or loosed according to whose loaves are inside. The oven's mouth turns neighbors into fellow shareholders in a single blaze. The taste of status runs through it all, quieter than a spice, but sharper. White bread crackles differently. Its crumb tears in silky flakes. Brown bread clings to knife and molar, strong as rope. No one says they envy the manchet on the reeve's board, but everyone notices how the light hits it. Even so, when the soup is thin, it is the brown loaf that saves the day. And the manchet would go tight-lipped with shame if asked to carry the weight of February alone. There's danger, of course. Ovens crack, roofs catch. A baker who falls asleep might wake a village to flame. Children are kept back by more than scolding. Every house remembers a cousin or a cousin's friend who has scorched their hands down to scars. The oven has its remedies: a damp mop for sparks, a door wedged just so, a bucket where anyone can see it. Still, this building wears its purpose like armor, the clay patched and repatched, the floor reseated with new tiles where an old one broke, the chimney whitewashed to show smoke's travel. When you carry your loaf home wrapped in cloth that now smells like a promise, you understand why bread is more than food. It is a calendar, a judge, a kind of coin. It is the village on your table, the miller's stones in your teeth, the brewer's barm in your crumb, the woodcutter's back in your crust, the oven's mathematics cooling under your palm. Set it down, tap the bottom for the hollow drum that says, a baker did their sums right, and listen to the tiny chorus of cracks as it breathes out the last of the bakehouse's heat. Tonight, it will be trencher. Tomorrow, it will be sops. Next week, it will grow hard and noble, and still find work under a grater or in a broth. Bread does not end, it converts. Before you tear it, someone traces a cross with the knife's tip. Not superstition only, but gratitude shaped into a small gesture. Then the first slice sighs, and your hands burn pleasantly, and any talk of fees and fines, of assizes and ovens, drops away for the moment. What is left is chew and warmth, a clean hunger meeting its match. For a few minutes, you eat in the company of everyone who waited outside that round, dark mouth, the line of the living closing for a heartbeat, into a circle. Back in the manor hall, the noise is different, less murmur, more hiss. It draws you the way thunder does, a promise of a spectacle. There, set before a throat of flame as wide as a cart, Is the machine of the evening a long iron spit, black as midnight except where it gleams with fat? Meat turns slowly at its center bronze, then lacquered, then nearly singing with heat so steadily you might think the fire itself were pulling it. Only when you crouch closer do you see the truth. A boy, cheeks pinked and eyes chalky with smoke, grips a handle and makes one careful quarter turn, then another, counting in his head, because time is muscle here. He cannot stop. Roasting is a patience that punishes. No method shouts a status more than this one. Boiling is efficient, stewing forgiving, baking communal, but the spit is theater. It demands height and breadth of hearth, a chimney with draw, ironwork of length and a strength, stacks of wood reduced to ember in a single evening, and above all, meat enough to make the room go quiet. A household that can afford a spare fuel and animal flesh to paint a fire with fat is a household with reach. Venison slides on with the particular hush that follows privilege. Forest law has a way of flavoring meat. A boar's flank promises a hunt told twice over, first in the chase, then in the carving, while geese, capons, or a string of small birds, threaded like beads, make a glittering garland, each body a boast that the net was heavy, and the purse heavier. Look at the rig itself. The spit is no simple rod. Hooks and cramp rings hold a haunch true. Trammels or counterweights kiss the irons to keep balance. Beneath, dripping pans wait like attentive secretaries collecting everything the meat whispers down, rendered fat, salt, faintly sweet brownings, the first thin juice. A long-handled spoon or a bunch of herbs bound up with twine serves as brush for basting of melted lard, verjuice, ale, a splash of wine, all flung back upon the turning body to glaze it, to protect it, to make it shine like varnished wood. Each pass is a promise that the outside will not betray the inside. Work, of course, is the shadow behind the shine. The boy turning is not alone. Someone minds the fire itself, encouraging it with billets laid fore and aft for an even wash of heat, raking coals out for a gentler lick, banking them back when the skin needs a stern word. Another mind, the cook's, hovers over the arithmetic of distance too near, and you blister too far, and you parch too slow, and you stew too fast, and you burn without cooking through. It is a geometry of glow and turning. There is talk, always, of the old trick pressing with a finger and listening for the spring of the flesh. But in truth, the cook trusts the color at the skewer's point and the way steam coils when pierced. In poorer cottages, the spit is a dream and the pot a fact. Roasting wastes fuel. A stew keeps broth and bone together, captures every drop of nourishment, and guards the cook's back against the scold of waste. But here, in halls where accounts carry columns that can bear it, meat is turned in the open and the labor that turns it is quiet. Turnspit becomes a boy's name before he's given one. He counts and counts, makes of his arm a clock. When his shoulders fail, there's a creature bred to take his place, the turnspit dog, low to the ground, long-backed and grave-eyed, set into a wooden wheel mounted high, trotting as if chasing some private horizon, while the axle turns the roast. In some kitchens, there are two wheels, a pair of dogs swapped when one shines with a sweat and begins to slow. The sight is comic if you stand far enough away. Close by, with the heat on your face and the pant on your ear, it is something else, ingenuity with a conscience. Not every wheel is flesh and breath. In later years, weight-driven and smoke-driven jacks creep into well-heeled kitchens' gearworks that sip motion from falling stones or rising heat and convert it to that steady, polite rotation the meat requires. They clatter and whir and occasionally fail at the worst moment, as all clever things do, sending boys and dogs back to the handle while the cook curses a craftsman in some town far away. But in most halls of the High Middle Ages, it is living effort that keeps dinner from charring. Listen to the spit's language. The pan below pops with a skip like small drum beats. The skin answers with a crackle that tightens into song. A faint, insistent hiss writes the fire's breath into the meat's surface syllable by syllable. The room develops a shared minute hand-eyes cut toward the hearth together when the sound shifts from shy to certain. Basting slows. The boy's turns grow smaller, more frequent, finer, the way a musician's wrist refines as a piece nears its end. When the cook finally nods, a fork slides in, and what comes out clings in a lacquer that tells everyone within reach where they live on the ladder of comfort. Sauces wait off to the side, not to disguise, but to announce: green sauce, sharp with parsley, sorrel, and vinegar, snaps at rich meat like a good friend who knows when to tease. Cameline, cinnamon dark with a quiet throb of clove and ginger, is folded from breadcrumb, wine, and a spice until it coats a spoon like a soft roe. Sometimes there is mustard pounded with verjuice to make a burn that wakes the mouth and lets it rest again. Fat gathered from the drip pan marries to these in the last minutes, and what seemed a waste, a steady rain into iron, becomes the meal's second voice. The carving is its own craft and its own theater. Meat is borne in with the room on its best behavior. The carver, standing, raises his knife the way a scribe raises a pen, and the first slice is less about portion than about authority. To cut true, at angle and against grain, to keep moisture where it belongs and serve the choicest morsel to the hand that signs the wages. These are skills that make men valuable. There are names for the motions and politenesses about who receives what cut that feel as rigid and mysterious as liturgy. A platter pauses near a guest you should flatter. Another travels quickly past the man you can afford to forget. If there is a pang anywhere, it lives in comparison. The turnspit boy and the dog will eat last and not this. They will take the scraps that liquor the trenchers and the crust that went too far toward coal. They will be grateful. The hall itself will pridefully forget the whole structure that made its shimmer possible. But the kitchen remembers. A cook who has nursed a spit from woodpile to platter sees all the faces in a slice. The masons who raised the hood, the woodsman who coppiced the stand, the swineherd whose picks gave their bellies to bacon for larding and baste, the brewer whose ale softened the glare of the heat. Everyone is in the shine, roasting leeks into other labors. Larding needles flash earlier in the day, drawing strips of bacon through lean venison to a stitch in a sucker. Spits are rubbed with sand and vinegar after service until iron shows itself beneath the soot. The hearth is swept forward carefully so tomorrow's stew does not wear tonight's ash. The drippings are set by Ina crocks to harden and be remelted into pies, or to gloss a pan when onions begin to think about sweetness. Nothing that fell from the meat will be forgotten by the kitchen. Extravagance and economy keep house together more than they quarrel. Even fuel has flavor. Oak gives a noble heat and a steady coal. Beech, a reliable bed. Fruitwood, a perfume that feeds the skin. Resinous wood is avoided lest it whisper bitterness into fat. A careful cook will set a split log to preheat behind the cheeks of the fire so that when it is added, it does not chill the blaze. In a long winter, the arithmetic tightens. You feel out the roast with less flamboyance, more craft. Boiling may return to the weekday and spit to the saint's day. A good household knows when deeds must shrink into symbols, a smaller joint turned as reverently can declare prosperity's continuity when the ledger says it wavers. Some roasts never touch the common tongue. The right to eat the king's deer is the right to be seen as someone in whose presence such meat belongs. The forest guards its privileges with teeth, and the kitchen learns to mind them. Yet even here taste slips the leash. The spices that finish noble roasts, pepper-pinched deer, cinnamon and ginger poured a little recklessly, leave a scent that walks out the doors and into markets, into middling houses where a hen is roasted for a guest, and a sprinkle of pepper appears at the end like a signature learned from far away. It is easy to be dazzled by the turning and forget what it is replacing. For those who eat pottage nightly, the spit is the dream of texture crust, crackle, a ribbon of crisp fat over tender meat, the miracle of a mouthful that changes as you chew. No one needs to be taught to love that, whatever century they are born into. But roasting carries its warning baked into its beauty. It is a way of cooking that spins loudly, the very sound of it, the spitting, the flaring, the shout to draw the pan away, when a gush of fat finds too much fire, tells you coin is being burned into flavor. When the last platter leaves the hearth and the boy finally lets go the handle, he flexes his fingers, hears them complain, and grins in a way that belongs to those who have finished something difficult. The dog, if there is one, drops from the wheel to a patch of stone blessedly cool. Someone will share a bone with him, and he will dream of chasing that private horizon without wood and without heat. The cook tastes the air as though it were a sauce and judges the evening done well or just well enough. The fire settles back into its own breath. Tomorrow the same hood will shelter a pot, and the room will smell of cabbage and barley instead of cinnamon slick venison. The spit will hang quiet, a javelin asleep in the rafters, waiting for the next night when the house decides it must speak in the language of flame again. The spit's bravura fades as your gaze drifts to the quiet power of the hearth's other labor, the pots that never stop speaking. They don't sing like fat on flame. They murmur. A round-bellied cauldron hangs from its iron trammel, the chain notched to find the perfect height, and beneath it the fire is coaxed into a low, polite glow. Steam curls up with the patience of prayer. This is not a drama that spends loudly. This is the long arithmetic of survival barley, cabbage, peas, a bone if luck smiles simmered until each thing ceases to be itself and becomes broth. Here lies the true majority of medieval eating pottage. The word swallows 1,000 daily variations, from a thin, honest soup that tastes like the garden and the field, to a rich, velvet stew whose perfume announces a household that can afford more than newsprint spice. In a poor cottage, pottage is the answer to every question. What for breakfast? What for supper? What for tomorrow? The pot keeps its place on the hook or the hearthstone, and is fed like a living thing, a ladleful taken out, a handful put in, the balance maintained by instinct and an eye for hunger. The youngest children learn first by ear the soft plop when barley slips off the spoon means thickening. The quiet rattle of the lid tells of a boil that wants taming. Sometimes that pot is older than the cook's marriage. Its interior, cured by years of heat, holds the memory of meals. There are stories that certain country pots were never emptied fully. The last ladle washed the sides for the next day, bringing yesterday's comfort forward. A perpetual stew sounds like a joke until cold weather and short days turn the idea into common sense. The taste deepens because time has a flavor. The method does more than feed many mouths on little coin. It is thrift disguised as tenderness. Boiling keeps what roasting throws to the pan. Bone surrenders marrow to broth. Gristle relaxes into silk. Dried peas and beans swell back toward life and then beyond it, giving their body to the thick. A cook who has learned to skim the gray scum that rises early, taking bitterness away with a sweep of the spoon, knows that economy has its courtesies. A bowl of pottage is not a compromise. It is the form in which the countryside remembers how to be kind to itself. Listen more closely and you hear a social grammar too. In houses where the hearth is the only table, one pot binds bodies together. Spoons share the same broth. Bread is dipped into the same heat. Elbows brush. Children learn what fairness tastes like. A good cook stirs not only for even heat, but to fold the pot's best bits throughout, lest one bowl sing and another sulk. Bread the tough, brown heel of it softens into sops, soaking up what the spoon can't carry. Trencher bread at richer boards plays the same game on a grander scale, but in cottages, the bowl and the soppy have been married a long time. Fuel teaches its own lessons. Stewing keeps the fire modest. A banked bed of coals cradles the iron. The lid settles. The pot does the hours while hands go to other work. Women can spin flax, patch a sleeve, rock a child, and nose back to the cauldron when the sound changes. The fat edge of a boil is not a sound to be trusted. It asks for a stir or a lift higher on the chain. The day accepts this low, steady bargain. The cook gives watchfulness. The pot gives certainty. Not every pottage is humble. In noble and monastic kitchens, the same method blossoms with almond milk, wine, and spice. Bread is not only dipped into broth, but beaten into it, thickening sauces until they glaze a spoon. A handful of ground almond turns a fast-day fish stew into something that feels like grace. Verjuice, the tart press of unripened grapes, brightens a pot that wants waking. Saffron burns a little sun into it when the purse allows. Meat may be minced and pounded to tenderness, folded back into its own broth with ginger and cinnamon until the spoon lifts something that tastes less like field and more like silk. There are days when cooks shape meatballs into pears or rabbits, a small edible trick that pleases a table even before the taste lands. Between those extremes lies the common, generous middle: cabbage and leeks, onions and carrots, dried peas and beans. Whatever grows with manners fall to the knife and into the pot. A rind of cheese drops in near the end and teaches the broth to speak roundly. If there is bacon, it is cut very small and makes itself larger in the scent than in the bite. Bones, bought cheap from the butcher, are boiled twice: first, to strip them; second, to honor them. A cook saves yesterday's pottage to become today's early meal, thickened with oats in winter so a body can walk out into the white fields holding warmth like a second shirt. Scholars will argue on paper about monotony and malnutrition. The pot responds in its own language. Some days are lean and taste like duty. Others bloom because the garden had an extra armful to spare. There are months when the herb bundle the cook ties parsley, sage. A fist of thyme does the work of travel, bringing a form of variety that cannot be bought. A handful of mustard seed, crushed in a mortar, wakes the pot as surely as a sermon wakes a drowsy church. And pepper, measured like a sin you can afford to commit only on feast days, raises eyebrows and talk. Medicine sits at the edge of the ladle. The humors will have their say, cooling broths for the feverish, warming for the cold-blooded and pale. Thyme wandered into the pot first because it smelled right, and then it stayed because someone noticed coughs were easier. Fennel helps the belly. Sage seems to bring a strength back to the wrists. And garlic is admitted with a grimace because it drives away more than vampires. A woman who stirs well also brews well. The kitchen is pharmacy without saying so. When the child won't eat, bread is broken small and drowned in warm milk or ale, and a spoon becomes a lullaby. Lent presses upon the pot like a hand. Meat falls away, fish swims in, herring salted in barrels, eels pulled from the river, carp fattened patiently in ponds, each find its way into the same round belly on the fire. The cook lays aside dairy at the rule's command and reaches for almonds. The pot agrees to the substitution with a soft, agreeable thick. On saints' days, the pottage may be as plain as water and peas. On Sundays, it may remember to be generous. The calendar is a palette. The cook paints with obedience. Of all the virtues stewing teaches, patience is the first and last. A stew forgives distraction and rewards attention. If the cook must step away, the pot waits. If she leans in and skims or stirs, the pot answers with brightness no one can name but everyone tastes. The hidden crafts multiply with experience. When to salt early for beans, late for peas, when to drop in the cabbage after the barley remembers softness, when a bone has told its whole story and can go. Even the choice of vessel matters. Iron holds heat like a promise. Glazed earthenware glides it gently. An old soapstone pot makes the quietest stew you've ever heard. There's hierarchy here too, but it moves like a tide rather than a wall. In the great houses, what remains in the cauldron after the carvers and platters have had their will slips downward. Servants eat well on the tails of their betters, and sometimes better on a Tuesday than a peasant does at Christmas. In towns, guild halls begin with a bowl before they lift a knife, a recognition that warmth in the belly makes men more brotherly and less exacting, with the reckoning of ounces and loaves. Outside hospital gates, cauldrons of thin pottage are ladled into wooden bowls as alms. Charity finds its most practical shape as something warm enough to steam in cold air. If there's joy in the quiet pot, it comes at unlikely moments. The kitchen settles in winter, and that first spoonful burns the tongue in a way you know you'll forgive. A stray sprig of rosemary makes the whole room smell like better company is expected. A rind of last year's cheese resurfaces and melts, like the answer to a prayer you'd forgotten you'd said. Even the sound contributes. A boil that has been argued down to a tremor, and then allowed to rise again, carries a rhythm that settles children like a familiar song. The pot makes room for grief, too. In dearth, it teaches hard lessons, stretching bread with beans, color with marigold petals, flavor with the last onion hidden from mice. When a store's a spoil or a barrel of salt meat proves too eager to return to the earth, the pot becomes the place where failures are forgiven as far as fire and patience can manage it. A long simmer can polish rough edges, but it cannot make coin from a stone. The kitchen knows this and keeps its head. And yet across class and climate, the method abides. A noble table may improve a pottage until it looks like silk and a spice in a silver bowl, while a cottager's spoon scrapes the last sweetness from a carrot's shoulder. But both will close their eyes for a heartbeat at the first swallow. Stew is a language everyone speaks. Roasts dazzle, pies flatter, street food excites, but the spoon's journey from pot to mouth remains the most persuasive argument food ever makes for itself. When the room empties and the fire banks low, the cauldron isn't banished. It's tucked to the hearth's edge, where the coals still breathe and left to keep the night. Someone will wake before dawn, stir the skin away, and taste the future. There will be a salt to add, and maybe oats. There will be children rubbing their eyes and following the smell even before they know they are awake. The day will begin the way it ended, with warmth traveling from iron to spoon to hands to mouths, the most ordinary miracle the Middle Ages ever performed, repeated until it remade the year. Step from the glow of the hearth into the cool, almost church-like hush of a storage, the narrow door, the smell of damp oak and salt, the faint sweetness of old smoke. In here, the seasons are tamed as far as human hands can manage it. Medieval cooking begins in fire, but it survives by what waits in the dark casks of brine, strings of dried things, sacks that promise meals when the fields lie iron hard. In a world without ice boxes or easy certainties, preservation is the steady heartbeat under winter's coat. Salt rules this room. It sits in a wooden chest like a snowdrift, clumping in the corners, tracing white lines along the lid where damp air has breathed on it. The stuff was dear enough to count by the handful boiled from sea pans along windy coasts or hacked in crystal plates from inland mines, yet ordinary enough to be rubbed into almost everything that mattered. A side of pork turns pale under a crust as thick as bark. A strip of beef goes stiff. It's red, retreating to gray. When it's done, the meat is rinsed, packed into a barrel, and drowned again, this time in brine strong enough to float an egg. A flat stone keeps it down. The cooper's skill holds the rest. Riveted hoops ring the staves like a promise. Without tight barrels, no pantry holds. Salt does not cook flavor into food, it holds ruin at bay. The first bite out of the barrel is never delightful. A good cook accepts that and plans the cure for the cure, a soak that leaches the salt, a long, plain boil to loosen the fibers, then gentler cooking with what the season can spare. Onion and leeks return softness to salted beef. A fist of parsley turns the edge toward green. Ale stands in for water when you want a friendlier bitterness. The precious result is not luxury. It is certainty ladled into bowls when the garden has nothing to say. Fish multiplies the lesson. In coastal towns, men in tarred caps empty boats into waiting barrels while the gulls make a scandal of the sky. Herring are layered like coin fish, fish, salt, until the cask is a kind of clock that will tick all the way inland. The trade rolls through the year like a tide. Carts creak toward market towns where fast days are frequent, and fish is the lawful answer. Inland, the barrels are opened with a knife and a prayer. The smell is bold, and the flesh is stubborn until it has been courted back toward tenderness, simmered with herbs, or fried until the edge is crisp and the kitchen forgives the nose. Not all preservation is brine. Step under the rafters and listen sausages, knock together softly when the draught stirs, their skins wrinkled, colored the brown of hearth smoke and patience. Hams darken to the shade of old leather while a sweet smoke oak. Sometimes beech, sometimes bundles of aromatic herbs pitched deliberately on the embers, threads itself into the meat. A smoke loft in the cottage roof will do for a modest family. Whole villages build separate smokehouses like little chapels, where the air forever smells of winter salvation. Weeks pass. The taste concentrates to something almost musical. Deeper than fresh meat can sing the flavor of time behaved itself. The dry goods crowd in like reliable friends. Socks of peas and beans stack against the wall, their sides caved where hands have pressed them. Grain makes a gritty whisper as you shift it. The cook's palm buries, lifts, judges. These seeds are creatures with only one demand: keep me dry, and the scullions are sent to lift every sack, roll every barrel, check for weeping seams, chase mice from corners, dust with ash or herbs, where custom says vermin shrink away. When the pot is lean, a double handful of legumes swells under heat into small, honest comfort. In good years, nobody loves them. In bad years, nobody underestimates them again. Fruit has two lives. The first is the orchard's crisp bite. The second belongs to winter. Apples are wrapped in a straw in a cool corner and checked like babies, each one turned to keep rot from marching. Grapes submit to the sun and come back as raisins. Figs collapse into their own sweetness and hold it there. Plums are reborn as prunes, black, glossy, and indecently rich when they meet pork in a pot. You can gnaw the history of August on a January night and feel the year give a kind of apology for its thinness. Vinegar and verjuice sharpen the room with their sour perfume. A crock near the wall holds turnips and cabbage quarters submerged in tang strong enough to clear a head. The sharpness is more than flavor. Acid is its own a small gatekeeper, warding off the unseen with a scowl. In a house with a cow, a pan of butter might be churned hard and salted, then packed into a pot and sealed with a lid of clarified fat. In a house with goats, the milk remembers summer by turning itself obligingly into cheese, hard-rinded, salty, built to last. Cheese is not a luxury here, it is a trick for turning grass and thyme into something stowable. Risk lives beside every method. Brine goes wrong, a sourness that is not the right kind, a slickness on meat that tells you you have been careless or unlucky. A barrel weeps, a mouse nibbles through a seam. Storm-fattened air wanders in and everything requires attention. There's no such thing as a set-and-forget pantry. The cook's eye learns to see through wood, to know by knuckle tapping whether the cask is swelling or shrinking, to scent taint before a guest can. An hour each week in the storeroom saves 3 in grief later. The household understands that the difference between thrift and waste is measured in small inspections and a willingness to throw away the first inch of anything that looks like it could argue. Preservation reshapes cooking as surely as the calendar does. Salt beef wants a day's head start in cold water before it will be civil. Smoked ham asks for a slow simmer before a glaze can shine. Dried peas demand soaking if you want them to break into kindness instead of bouncing in the bowl. Families learn to lay their tomorrow out on the table tonight, not simply because patience is a virtue, but because it is the only way to have supper that does not taste of scolded haste. Planning is flavor. The pantry pushes outward into the world of trade. The herring that supports a fasting town teaches roads to be brave in winter. Stockfish, air-dried white flesh from cold northern coasts, arrives as stiff as a board and, after long coaxing, turns soup into the sort found in monasteries and merchant kitchens on days when meat is forbidden. Salt travels in other guises, too in coarse crystals for rubbing, in fine for finishing, in sticky. Mineral cakes that speak of particular places. The gossipy economy of the market learns the smell of barrels brined from the sea, tar from the cooper, apples from orchards 2 counties over. What will keep becomes coin. There is art here. There's also fear. A mother counts sausages by touch in the dark and calculates how many nights stand between the family and green shoots in the garden. She knows exactly how far she can water the pottage without making it taste like defeat. An old man tests the brine with a floating egg the same way his grandfather did, and doesn't try to explain the trueness of a method that has no numbers in it. Some winters pass like guests, polite and brief. Others settle like debt. The storeroom tells you which sort you are living through, and it does not lie. When weather is very cold, the north lends a hand. A fish laid outdoors becomes hard as a spill of slate. A joint of meat stiffens in the rafter draft and sleeps. Far south, summer gives its aid instead. Sun-thin cuts of fruit until they are memory without water. Between those extremes, smoke is the ally most houses can count on. Its work is slow, sometimes sweet, sometimes bitter if you've banged the fire carelessly, but it has the patience to treat 100 meals at once. A smokehouse door opened on a damp afternoon is a comfort like turning the corner toward home. Listen long enough, and the pantry's quiet becomes a grammar you can hear. The dull clunk of a sound barrel head, the faint crackle of dry peas resettling, the drip of brine from a careless ladle, the squeal of a mouse that shouldn't have come, the soft, papery rattle of onions plaited into ropes and hung where air can mind them. You could write a calendar from that music. There is a modest politics to it all, too. In towns, rights to bake and to cure may belong to a lord or abbey. Fees are taken in coin or in slices. A household counts its hams and knows that 1 in 10 will go to rent as surely as the tithe of grain does to the church. Salt has laws written over it. Men have argued about it and bled. But in cottages, the argument resolves to a simple conclusion. We must have enough to carry us. And after all the tending and counting and praying, the proof is in the pot on a throw iron. A winter stew built from soaked beef, dried prunes, and cabbage sweet, sour, and strong at once arrives at the table and asks nobody's pardon. A skillet of smoked sausage and onions fried brown enough to go sticky makes the whole room lean closer. a bowl of dried peas loosened with ale and comforted with sage tastes like a door closed against wind. Preservation is not only insurance when you do it well, it is also flavor with a biography. Walk back toward the fire and look once more over your shoulder. The pantry is not grand. It will not make a poem out of itself the way a peacock roast tries to. But its shelves hold the difference between talk and a silence at mealtime. Families stand here in autumn with knives and a string and do the arithmetic of survival. They return in February with candles guttering and measure how true they were. The room keeps score without cruelty. It rewards attentiveness. It forgives small mistakes if you are humble and quick. It has only one commandment, written in salt bloom on every barrel: see to me, and I will see you through. Follow the road out of smoky kitchens and into the open square where sound arrives, first a chorus of bargaining voices, wooden wheels rattling over cobbles, geese objecting to their own destiny. Market day doesn't knock, it floods. The smells crest in waves: fried batter and hot fat, bruised apples, damp wool, the clean bite of chopped parsley, the briny insistence of fish. A town can be poor in a dozen ways, but a market makes it feel briefly rich, its hunger organized into stalls. Nothing here is accidental. A painted board on the market cross lists the days allowed by charter. The bell that opens trading is not a courtesy, but a law. Officials in hooded cloaks circulate with small balances and cold expressions, bread weighers with their scales, ale tasters with their leather breeches and quiet authority. Measures are checked against iron standards kept in the guild hall. A bushel that cheats the eye will cost a seller dear. You can hear regulation at work in the background, like a low drum, the mutter of a scribe taking a complaint, the sharp clack of a confiscated false weight dropped into a chest, the distant voice of a crier reading out fines for regrading or forestalling. Rules keep the square from turning wolfish. The traffic of food is arranged in its own map. Vegetable sellers keep to one lane baskets of turnips, carrots, and parsnips like a muted rainbow, cabbages heavy as stones, beet greens shining with morning wash. Children rub dirt off onions with their sleeves for a better shine. The vocabulary of seasons is all here to be read by nose spring leeks and their green bite. Summer cherries piled like rubies on rush mats, autumn apples sweetening the air, winter roots that smell of cellars and patience. Buyers don't pick so much as weigh with the hand heft a cabbage, ruffle a bunch of thyme, pinch a berry to test its honesty. At the edge of order, the animal world deals its own goods. A fishmonger slaps a living eel onto wet boards, its silver body bucking, water flinging into the faces of squealing boys. Nearby, herring are laid out in ranks like soldiers who know the sea too well. Inland markets will argue for a century about their freshness. Some housewives swear by the barrel and the salt. Others reach for herbs and ale to coax age toward flavor. Shellfish clatter in wicker baskets, oysters cheap enough to be workman's food near the coast. Mussels steaming in a pot that perfumes the alley with a clean tide smell. A crowd gathers because hunger is half curiosity. Bread sellers shout the day's price without shame. White loaves for those with money, brown and black for those with sense. The assize has set the weight, but wheat does not care for laws. A bad harvest pulls flour toward darkness and coarseness, and the town adjusts its tongue. Housewives buy by feel a loaf should answer the tap of a knuckle like a good door. A boy, his apron whiter than his hands, tucks stale yesterdays under the board for the poor or the pigs. Nothing here is without a buyer. Street cooks work at a different music. Iron pans hiss as batter hits their faces. A patchwork of pancakes flips in quick succession, each one browned in fat that smells both sinful and irresistible. Pies come in coffins, pastry cases thick as armor, not meant to be eaten so much as to keep gravy honest and the filling safe. A vendor cracks one open with a practiced twist of the knife. Steam roars up and the crowd leans forward as if toward a hearth. A ladle of hot pea potted, sold for a penny, goes down like mercy on a cold day. You can track the line of workers by the grease shine on their lips. A different scent threads the noise warm, peppery, a whisper of far roads. The spice merchant keeps to the dry side of the square, under canvas against the jealous weather. Boxes open like secrets, pepper that tickles the nose, ginger that pricks the tongue awake, cinnamon coiled like bark with a story, saffron glowing as though sun could be shredded. The merchant weighs in drams, not handfuls, and wraps the treasure in waxed paper with fingers that never hurry. Housewives count coins twice before buying a pinch for a wedding stew. A guild master orders by the ounce to gild a festival sauce. The stall is as much theater as trade. To stand there breathing is to travel without moving. Barter vibrates beneath coin like a second language. A tanner swaps thin leather for onions and a slab of cheese. A shepherd's wife talks a baker into parting with yesterday's crusts in exchange for wool promised at shearing. A potter offers a stack of cups to a brewer for a cask she cannot possibly drink alone. The market tolerates these small loops of obligation because they knit a town tight. Credit is a story agreed upon. Food is how you remember the plot. Around the edges, life that isn't food attaches itself, as it always does. A friar climbs the cross steps and preaches briefly against gluttony while keeping one eye on the pie stall. A fiddler saws through a tune. A tumbler draws a ring of delighted children. A tooth drawer waves a bloody molar like a banner to prove his art. Two constables pace, particular about nothing until they're suddenly particular about everything. A proclamation is nailed up, damp parchment puckering, announcing tolls due at the gate and reminding sellers that pigs must wear rings in their noses if they are to be brought through the streets. Sophistication and mud share the same cobbles. Not all markets are kindly. The Lord's purveyor might arrive with writ in hand, taking a tenth of fish or grain for court or garrison, payment to follow in a season that never quite comes. A reaper of dues tallies a stall fees with a bone pen and a slow smile. Yet even resentment counts as a participation. If the square were empty of power, it would also be empty of goods. People calculate this while they shop, and they make the best of it, because the stew does not season itself and bread does not deliver itself. Amid the bustle, small bureaucracies of taste do their work. An ale conner rolls up a breeches leg and kneels in a puddle of spilled drink, testing the stickiness by the cling. A fish inspector presses a thumb under gills and looks at his nail for the right color. The cheese reeve pricks, rinds, and sniffs the pin. These rituals are half theater, half protection, but they make a difference. Nobody thanks these men out loud, and yet the square goes on humming because they exist. Buyers leave breadcrumbs of gossip in their wake. You can learn who owes whom for last year's seed, who came back from pilgrimage thinner, who married in haste, who has a sow near to farrowing, whose son has taken a place in the next town's workshop. A market is a stomach and a tongue. The square eats coin and news and exhales recipes. A woman leans close to another and whispers how much sage to use with salted mutton. A man brags of a pie so rich it needed 3 kinds of meat and 2 kinds of fruit. Somebody laughs, and the rumor is halfway round the church before the bell for noon. By early afternoon, the bright edge of choice dulls. The biggest cabbages are gone. What fish remain will require more herbs. The pies become fewer and more pleading. Sellers cut prices with the sun. Dogs assemble as if summoned, knowing the tide turns their way at this hour. A boy with a broom pushes peelings into a pile. A piglet noses through before he can scoop it up. A girl collects yesterday's broken pottery for the path at home. Waste, like hunger, is organized. Ale ladled from a barrel into earthen jugs keeps the talk from fraying. Everyone drinks it. The craft is weak but honest and quicker to draw than water you do not trust. Hands grow looser with it. Bargains become easier or harder depending on the drinker's nature. A group of apprentices clink cups and pass a heel of bread between them, making a lunch fit for boys whose stomachs never empty properly. An old woman dips her crust into the hot pea soup and nods at nobody in particular. Satisfied? When the bell tolls again, shutters clap down with a rhythm as old as the charter. Wheels turn toward the gates. Geese go the other way, protesting the future. The spice merchant snuffs his brazier and locks his boxes. Officials add up their notes. The last of the fines goes on the tally, and a tired scribe sands the page. The square, suddenly wider and quieter, smells of grease cooling on iron and of rain that may or may not come. The market has eaten the day and is content. You walk home with the square's story in your basket, onions and a good cabbage, a loaf with a crust that talks back, a pouch of parsley, 2 herrings packed tight in paper, a small cone of fresh butter if luck smiled, and a tiny twist of pepper you will not waste. Your sleeve carries cinnamon because you stood too close to the merchant's table. Your shoes carry mud because you stood too close to everything else. Supper now has a face and a future. The hearth will do its part, but it cannot conjure what the market did not offer. Behind you, the last stallboards thump into carts. Before you, the road lifts slightly toward the low door of home. Market day is not a festival. It is a hinge. The week swings on it. The pantry fattens or thins. Moods brighten or darken. Stews lean or generous. Tomorrow's pot begins here, in the clatter and the rules and the warm hand over warm bread, in the eel's last thrash and the spice merchant's careful pinch. It is not romance, it is the complicated kindness of a town to its own hunger. Leave the clamor of the square and take the path that skirts hedges and cottage walls. Here the smells are different, less of hot fat and horse, more of damp earth, crushed green, a sweetness lifted by sun. The village loosens into back plots fenced with woven hurdles. Every scrap of soil is spoken for, not show gardens, no ornamental borders to impress a guest. These are workrooms under open sky pottage in embryo, medicine under a stem, winter hope in leaf. If a cottage has ground at all, it has a garden. The beds are edged with willow wattles or rough stones, paths no wider than a single foot, and a basket. Tall things, cabbage and colawort, stand at the back like sentries, and a neat parade of onions and leeks marches in front. Between them, the soft-herbed commons, parsley, sage, thyme, dill, fennel, mint. You can read supper in the textures, the wax of cabbage, the squeak of chard, the brittle frill of dill. Reach down, and the soil keeps the day's warmth in its fist. These plots are kitchens before the fire is ever lit. A handful of parsley turns boiled peas into something you might smile at. A fist of leeks makes a fasting day feel less like penance. Families lean hard on these beds because markets fail, and neighbors fail, and sometimes weather fails. But a plant will do its best if you give it room and water. Potherbs, the old word calls them, the green things that make pots mean more than boiled barley. Old habit puts medicine beside flavor. The line between them is a hedge you can step over. Mint to ease the belly, sage for the throat, fennel to calm a cough, hyssop when the chest tightens. Calendula marigold glows at the edges like captured afternoon. Its petals will go into broth to gild it, and some swear to comfort the sick. Comfrey leaves hang in the shade to dry, a promise to knit bruises and cuts. Yarrow waits for nosebleeds and bad luck. A housewife can pick with one hand for supper and with the other for a poultice. She does not think of these as two tasks. How varied were these little empires that depends on the purse, the parish, the year. Some villagers tend only the certainties: onions, garlic, leeks, cabbage, peas. Others, proud as any guild master, can show you lovage tall enough to shade a child. Good chervil for spring potages, or sorrel whose lemony bite wakes a tired tongue. Honeyworts and borage bring bees, dill seed dries on cords for winter. One garden looks like thrift, the next looks like a low library you can eat. Leeks thrive where it's wet, and this is a country of wet. Their white shanks lift from the black soil like rolled parchment, and the cook's knife knows how to slide them into rings without nicking the heart. Cabbage is less delicate, a green skull you can heft in two hands. Those heads keep a long time, leaves peeling like pages as the winter dwindles. When the market has only shrugs to sell, a cabbage still offers work for the pot. Listen, and the garden speaks in small industry. Bees thrum at thyme flowers, heavy with errands. A child's laughter pops when a carrot gives up and comes clean of its grip. A hen mutters to herself, satisfied with a worm. From somewhere, a mallet taps hazel rods into bean teepees. Strings susurrate as they're tied. None of this is melodious, but each sound says something will be in the bowl tonight. Order has its own intelligence here. Tall herbs are banished to corners where they don't bully their neighbors. Sage can be a tyrant if left to itself. The cooks know where the sun falls by season, which bed stays mild, which one bakes dry. Ash from the hearth goes on beds that want more sweetness. Dung is worked in long before the seed thinks of waking. A midden nearby curdles and ripens into future cabbages. Nothing is wasted because tomorrow is a creditor with a good memory. And there color that lies a little. Marigold petals, dried and crumbled, pinch into soups to give them the coin glow of a saffron. Saffron itself is a royal stranger in most villages, but gardens know the trick and wink. The mouth is not fooled, only comforted, and that may be the better magic. In a richer yard, you might find saffron's blue crocus in a patch of its own, guarded by pride and a small dog. Monasteries do all this on a sober, generous scale. Their cloister garths are green diagrams, physic garden, kitchen garden, orchard, fish ponds beyond, brothers pace with baskets, cutting fennel and dill, sage and rue, lavender for closets, mint for ale and for fevers. In their kitchen, almond milk takes the heat gently. Fish stews whiten and thicken. Herbs go in not by pinch, but by philosophy. These are the places where herb lore becomes book lore, where the uses of plants are copied in tidy hands, but the hands still smell of onion. Gardens are schools as much as pantries. A girl learns by shadowing how to pinch basil from the top to make it bush, how to cut leeks high and leave the heart to come again, how to thin carrots and eat the thinnings, how to string onions on twine so they dry without sulking. A boy is entrusted with the bucket and the gate, then with the knife, then with sorting the seed peas from the soup peas without being told twice. The lessons are not romantic, they are precise, and they are remembered in the tongue as much as the mind. Not every year is kind. Drought scours leaves to felt and breaks faith. Frost comes late and bites the first pride of beans. Slugs draw maps of hunger on tender cabbages. Flea beetles turn mustard to lace. A child is sent to chase pigeons until sundown. You can watch a mother do the arithmetic of a thin season just by how she looks at a bed slowly. Lips pursed, eyes counting. The pottage will be meaner, the herbs stingier, the winter longer. She will not say it out loud within earshot of children. Still, when the garden thrives, it makes the whole house larger. Herbs hanging from the rafters stipple the air with green perfume. Bees find the door without knocking. A bundle of thyme tied with fiber string feels like a certainty in the hand. Even a small luxury is a change in weather chives on porridge. Mint in ale, a handful of sorrel in a fish broth that suddenly tastes like a memory from a warmer country. There is trade between plots as there is between stalls. A neighbor with an extra row of onions swaps for cuttings of sage. A woman whose lovage has gone to a rusty, handsome forest offers seed for parsley in return. A monk passing through with a pack of slips comfrey, rue, customary trades for a knob of butter and a bed for the night. This is commerce without coin, credit secured by reputation and the promise to share when fortune tilts your way. You learn the village by following water. Buckets come up from the well, and their root writes a calendar in the dust. Morning watering is not kindness, but a strategy. Wet roots beat noon heat. Straw spread between rows keeps soil from losing its temper. After supper, a boy trots out with dishwater still smelling of onions. It is thrown where it will do good, and a cat watches with professional criticism. As day leans toward evening, the work gentles. Shadows cool the beds, the ground sighs, leak tops whisper. Bees turn home laden. A woman strips thyme into a bowl with both thumbs, the stems clicking like knitting needles. A man ties tall cabbages to stakes so wind cannot bully them overnight. A child collects snails in a pot as if capturing enemy scouts. The talk is low and full of lists. The body is tired in the right places. Pick a sprig of thyme, crush it, breathe. The scent is clean and convincing. It is the smell of the middle path between feast and famine, between market luck and winter's arithmetic. If the hearth is the heart of a house, the garden is its set of lungs, making breath out of light and time and patience. The fire will redden and boil what the soil gave. Between them is supper, and between supper and the next dawn lies the strength to go again. Step back to the path and look once more. The plots are small, but they repeat across the village until they are the village patches of green stitched together by hedges, a quilt that feeds and heals and teaches. Tomorrow you will go to market for fish or bread, and the squaw will sing and argue, but what you bring home will meet this quiet green. And in that meeting the Middle Ages eat and survive and sometimes are happy. Leave the quiet beds of leek and thyme behind and follow the long road that unspools toward the horizon. The air thins, dries, and begins to smell of dust and sun-baked rope. You hear pack bells before you see the train itself, camels shifting like knotted waves, mules piled with bales, merchants walking with the unhurried patience of people who measure distance in seasons. What comes on their backs does not look like supper. It looks like treasure. It is treasure, pepper, ginger, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, saffron, names that sound like heat and distance, names that sailed and stumbled into medieval kitchens and changed the tongue's imagination forever. Start with pepper, the little black bead that stands in for a world. It slides ashore at Alexandria or Acre, rides galleys to Venice or Genoa, and then moves inland in guarded caravans to Bruges and London, to fairs at Champagne, to the counting rooms of cautious men. It is weight and wealth together. Charters take rent in peppercorns. City guilds form around it, the pepperers, who later become grocers. Their shops along Cheapside, fragrant, with open jars. A sack of pepper can quiet a creditor, raise an eyebrow, buy a favor. You can almost hear the chink as it pours, a dry rain of money. Pepper is the commonest rarity, the way a star is the most familiar miracle. It finds its way into fish on Fridays, into beef on feast days, into the sauce that rescues a tired roast. A pinch turns broth quick and argumentative on the tongue. Cooks learn its grammar enough to wake, not so much that you drown, and where pepper treads, other strangers follow. Ginger with its warm, quick light, cinnamon with the soft wood sweet that makes meat behave like memory, long pepper with its odd floral insistence. To medieval mouths, sweet and savory are not quarrelsome cousins, they are a good marriage. Venison can be coaxed with sugar and cinnamon. A fish can swim in a sauce of ginger and almonds. Wine hippocras can be heated, sugared, and studded with cloves until it tastes like a winter that forgives. That sugar, remember that it is not a pantry staple yet, but a polished tower, a cone wrapped in blue paper, chipped with knives, sold by apothecaries as medicine as much as luxury. It arrives from plantations and boiling houses far to the south and east, and when it meets spices, it acts like a herald. Together, they dress the table in borrowed sunlight. A lord can show you his spice coffer as he might show you a hawk-trained power, expensive obedience. A merchant's wife might set a jar of ginger on the credence not to use it, but to be seen near it. Saffron is a different radiance entirely dear as a sin you smile about. Threads like dried sparks, light as a promise, with the trickster's ability to stain everything gold. One pinch and a humble broth glows like a reliquary. A custard looks as though it were poured out of afternoon. preciousness invites mischief. Saffron is stretched with marigold or old silk fibers, dyed and dried to deceive the hurried buyer. Statutes threaten counterfeiters with ruin and worse. Whole towns take its side fares whose pride is measured in yellow. Fields in Spain that shimmer with the harvest. In later years, an English market whose very name will remember it. Once, a seized shipment sparks a brief war. People bleed for a flower because flavor has become a flag. Cloves and nutmeg wear farther faces. They come from islands the maps can barely keep still, places that move around in the mind like whales. Sailors swear and die for them. Scribes draw their leaves with wishful pens. When a cook crushes a clove, an entire chain of hazard sighs out of the mortar. Nutmeg breaks open with a clean, cold perfume that feels like snow in a hot room. Neither is necessary, both are irresistible to those who can pay. They promise that your table touches the edge of the world. Did ordinary mouths taste these wonders? Sometimes, and the uncertainty matters. A widow might swap eggs for a thimble of pepper at Christmas. A bride might stir a wedding pottage with ginger saved for a year. A guild might reward its journeyman with a spice loaf at Candlemas. Sweetness as proof of belonging. Mostly, the poor live by onions and leeks and cabbage and the honesty of salt. But even they can name the scents. Even they have stood near a stall and breathed in a fist of cinnamon and smiled as if let in on a secret. Follow the roots with your nose, the Levant a sniff of tar and fig, Red Sea ports smell of date and idea, Venetian warehouses breathe damp wood and promise, along the Adriatic galleys grumble in their berths like tethered cattle, tariffs bite chunks from every bale, agents grease the palms that cannot be avoided, pirates put lean hands on the ropes. Somewhere in a counting house, a man with ink on his fingers calculates the risk and says yes anyway. Spices make timid cities brave. They fasten alliances that letters cannot. A cargo safely landed can fatten a treasury. A lost one can thin a dynasty. Inside the market stall, the spice merchant becomes a storyteller. He does not sell scent alone. He sells the road that produced it. Pepper from the Malabar coast, he says, and taps the scoop. Cinnamon from Ceylon, or what we call it because we do not know it. Ginger dried from ships that rode low with rain. Cloves from an island that is small enough to fit in a cup, and yet would not, could not. He opens a box of saffron, and the very light of the street seems to lean in. His wooden weights are honest if he has been watched this week. He lets you sniff and pinch, and he names prices without flinching. You will leave poorer and richer at once. The trade changes kitchens as much as the kitchens change trade. A recipe is rewritten to include pepper as much as suffices. Pork is braised with prunes and cinnamon, and no one blinks. Fish wears a sauce the color of August. Even fast days feel less like dull pewter when a bowl is bright with saffron. The church disapproves of gluttony, not of wonder. A monk can stir almond milk with ginger and still keep his vows straight. Meanwhile, cities write ordinances to keep merchants' honest jars must be uncovered, wares displayed, saffron sold pure, pepper not lifted with dust. The punishments are the kinds you remember when you're tempted. And still, there's theater. Spiced wine poured hot from silver jugs at court. A sugar tower that gleams like a frost-bitten tree. A roast that has seen a brush of saffron and pretends to be sunrise. Hosts set their spice jars where eyes will find them. Guests breathe deep and understand the unspoken. Here is a household whose reach is longer than the parish. Do not forget the other hand, the one that tightens. A season of storms can empty a spice box for a year. A border closes and pepper climbs to a price that makes people scowl while they pay it. A convoy is taken and a city's winter tastes of onions alone. The hunger for spice draws violence, and violence breeds hunger in return. Somewhere a sailor eats biscuit with weevils and thinks of the smell of cloves he last handled. Somewhere a clerk notes the loss as a column of numbers and goes home to a stew his wife has brightened with a whisper of ginger on purpose. Because she knows today he needs the world to feel bigger than his ledger. There are local rebellions that mimic the imported wonder. Country women make yellow broths with marigold and pretend at saffron without apology. Horseradish smacks the nose awake as sharply as pepper. Mustards grind into a heat that feels honest and local. Not everyone is impressed by foreign dazzle, but enough people are that the roads keep wearing smooth. What these flavors really buy is not only taste, but permission to imagine beyond the hedge, to believe that a pot can hold the map of the world in miniature. A pinch of pepper lets a mason in Lincoln believe he participates in something grander than his stones and mortar. A thread of a saffron lets a steward think his table is a minor embassy. Spices turn kitchens into geography. They tell the poor that the rich are performing. They tell the rich that they are performing well. At the day's end, the spice merchant shutters his stall, he weighs his money, checks his locks twice, and breathes in the scent that has climbed into his clothes and hair. He's going to carry cinnamon with him all the way home to a street that smells of leather and wet dog and cabbage and peas. In a cottage beyond the walls, a mother taps 2 tired peppercorns into the mortar for a wedding stew and smiles because 2 is enough when you have waited for them. In a monastery kitchen, a lay brother warms wine against the early dark and slips in cloves one by one, each a bead on a string of patience. The caravan road goes on by water and dust, by accounts and fever, by hope and habit. The Middle Ages fall asleep to the same old pottage, yes? But now and then the esteem carries a scent that was born on another ocean, that is not nothing, that is a curtain lifting. And in the cup or the bowl, for an instant, a small domestic life tastes of distances so wide the mind laughs and accepts them anyway. Leave the glittering spice jars behind and step through a crooked doorway into a single smoky room. Here the world turns small again, wood, clay, wool, and the steady patience of a pot. This is where most people ate most of their meals, not under painted rafters or beside marble hearths, but on packed earth, around a fire that knew every cough in the family. The table, when there is a table, leans, the bench creaks. A dog curls near the embers as if guarding the little heat left from the day. The meal tonight is not spectacle. It is habit that tastes of survival. Grain sits at the center like a stone in a sling. Barley, rye, oats when the weather is cruel, wheat only when fortune smiles. The loaf is not pale and soft, but dark, gritty, and heavy enough to thud when it drops. Sometimes it is maslin, a mixed bread wheat stretched with rye, its uneven crumb telling the story of fields that give what they can. If you bite in cautiously, your teeth find millstone grit, Gifts from hand querns and hurried grinding. Mothers learn to soften slices in warm ale or broth. Children dunk and wait, patient as cats, for the crust to surrender. In the pot, dinner thickens into the Middle Ages' most faithful sentence pottage. Tonight, this peas and cabbage. Last week, it was leeks and barley. In spring, it will be nettles, sorrel, and anything green enough to argue with winter. Bones lend themselves when they can be spared more voice than flesh, singing a little salt and a smoke into the broth. Some households boast a perpetual pot, never truly emptied, only revived yesterday's last ladle, becoming today's first foundation. Recipes here are measured in hands and memory a handful of oats, a turnip the size of a fist, as much salt as your youngest will bear without complaint. Meat visits like a cousin from far away, not never, but not often. A piglet grows fat on beech mast and kitchen leavings, then becomes sausages and salted cuts when cold weather is a sure lock. Chickens pay rent in eggs. They become stew only when they grow old or when feast days and hunger argue, and hunger wins. A joint of bacon hung out of reach of children and dogs is currency on a string. It moves from hook to hook above the smoke, a promise made visible. Dairy arrives in small, sour comforts, a jug of milk that is already thinking about becoming curds. Butter on festival bread, cold, spread thin. Cheese hard as thrift, but patient in the pantry. A wheel cut in January can still give slices in May when the hungry gap gnaws at gardens and granaries alike. In that lean season when the stored apples have withered and last year's onions sprout at their crowns, the pot learns humility. Cooks turn to dried peas, to bean flours, to stretchers and thickeners that make the broth behave as if fuller than it is. There's ale, weak and cloudy, brewed where the baby sleeps and the washing dries. It is not a luxury, but plumbing drinkable where water is doubtful, a daily damp against thirst. Women tend it as they tend everything else: soak, stir, skim, strain, hang a broom outside to signal a batch worth buying. Children sip from small cups, and no one finds it odd. The smell of mash climbing the rafters is the village's soft heartbeat, a yeast breath that says, for today at least, there will be something to swallow. Scholars might argue in their books whether peasants ate poorly or simply plainly, but the room itself answers it depends. It depends upon the harvest, upon the miller's honesty and the Lord's patience, upon weather that refuses to behave. Some years, bowls brim; on bad ones, families turn to horse bread, dark loaves bulked with beans or acorns, bitter as a sermon and twice as instructive. Still, the table hosts small celebrations, a spoon of honey saved for a saint's day, a handful of raisins slipped into a child's palm on a winter evening, a crust fried in a little fat and sprinkled with a pinch of the pepper bought last market day, because a daughter is marrying and ceremony deserves taste. Listen to the room. The spoon's wooden rim knocks the cauldron. The hearth chain sighs as it takes weight. Children whisper over which bowl will have the carrot, one bright coin in the stew. Story follows esteemed saints who walked on fish days. A grandfather who once saw the king's men ride by in cloaks the color of river water. These quiet tales are the dessert sugar of another kind, and they pass mouth to mouth, keeping the family's history warm. Economy speaks in customs as well as portions. The assize of bread and ale prices, printed in law rather than ink, tries to hold bakers and brewers to fairness. In practice, the poor often bake at home to dodge fees, tucking flat rounds against hot stones at the edge of the fire. When they do carry dough to the communal oven, each loaf bears a slash like a signature. A glance can tell which family it belongs to. The church's tithe takes a tenth and sometimes a sigh with it. Fasting days change the menu hardly at all for those who rarely see meat, though Friday's fish, salted and soaked, lends a different salt to the tongue. Hunger is not the only risk in the kitchen. Burns astripe forearms like bracelets. Smoke makes eyes a stream. Coughs settle low and stay. Children sit close to heat because cold hurts, and mothers caution them with one hand while stirring with the other. You learn where to place the pot so it will not kick. You learn how to bank embers so morning will not begin with flint and frustration. If the fire goes out, borrowing coals next door is neighborliness turned to necessity. A village is, among other things, a web of shared heat. Yet resilience is not an abstract virtue here. It is practical and particular. A garden gives what the field cannot, herbs that make a poor pot fragrant, scallions that behave like spring even in a late frost, marigold petals to cheat saffron's gold into a feast soup without lying. Children are sent to glean after harvest leftover heads of grain cradled like birds. A widow keeps bees and brings a spoon's worth when someone is ill. A man trades 3 dozen eggs for a bundle of leek seedlings because green feels like hope. Sometimes there's company. A traveler knocks, and though bowls are few, one more is found, the guests news bandits on the northern road. A fare moved forward. A rumor of new dues is eaten with the broth. Hospitality is measured in ladles, not in linens. The visitor's thanks is not a coin, but a blessing. Both spend well in the imagination. And yes, there are sweet moments. Pancakes on Shrove Tuesday, tossed out of the pan with a laugh. Fresh cheese salted and pressed on a cool morning. Apple fritters when the tree has been kind. On May Day, a posy of greens decorates the doorway and a pot is seasoned as if wealth were the herb. A family brings out their best bowl, the one without the chip, or with the chip turned away, and eats slowly, pretending the feast lasts as long as the story that accompanies it. When the meal ends, careful hands scrape bowls clean with bread. What remains returns to the pot. Nothing is ashamed to be tomorrow's flavor. The dog gets a bone and believes in God anew. Children drift toward a straw pallets, small mouths stained with onion and pride. The fire is tucked in like a child itself, coals pulled together, ashes smoothed over them. Someone hangs the ladle on its nail as if to say, "We will use you again." Someone folds the cloth over the bread with a tenderness that belongs to people and not to loaves. And yet here it is. Step outside. The village night says nothing, and everything smoke braids up through thatch. An owl names its own hunger. Frost frets at the edge of the path. Behind one shutter, a mother counts the carrots left in the basket. Behind another, a father whispers about a pig they might buy come autumn if the harvest holds. Hope is not a song belted at a feast. It is the hum people make in their throats while they wash the last spoon. You could argue that this food is bland, that it lacks the pageantry of cloves and sugar castles. Perhaps. But when you stand in this doorway, when the steam from the pot kisses your face, it is hard to call these bowls empty. They hold work and season, thrift and imagination. They hold the certainty that, if you are lucky and careful, there will be another bowl tomorrow in a century that can feel like one long winter. That promise is as fine a delicacy as any gilded roast. Step beyond the cottage door and into a different weather, altogether stone corridors exhaling chill, torches throwing restless shadows, a thud of feet and the hiss of fat that never quite stops. Here the kitchen is not a corner of the room. It is a complex, a living machine. The larder smells of salt and damp wood. The pantry is a geography of loaves and candles. The buttery keeps the ale in casks that whisper when tapped. Down in the cellar, wine sleeps like a hoarded secret. Above it all, the great kitchen roars, a cathedral to heat, where spits turn, kettles seethe, and orders rise like prayers, short, sharp, impossible to ignore. A noble household is an army wrapped in aprons. There is a clerk scratching accounts, how many geese, how much pepper, who supplied the eels. There is a pantler for bread, a butler for drink, a scullery that never finds the bottom of grease. The master cook is a general. Apprentices are the infantry. Fires tumble constantly, oak for a steady heat, brush for a sudden blaze to crisp a skin, peat where wood is dear. Iron spits look like lances stolen from the armory, each one skewering birds or joints that shine as though glazed with coins. A boy turns the handle and dreams of being anywhere else. If the household is rich enough, a weight-driven jack bares its teeth and clacks, a miracle of gears replacing a child's wrist. The menu is a procession with a memory. Pottages go first because they must know feast. However gilded, dares begin without the comfort of a seasoned broth. Then pies arrive, coffins with carved lids, steam sighing as the crust is lifted. Venison, currants, wine, and winter's patience tumble out in a dark tide. Fish appears even on meat days because the church takes the calendar seriously, and the Lord takes the church seriously. Salmon in the bright almond sauce, eels coiled like bracelets and glazed until they gleam. Almond milk, pounded and strained, glides into everything sauce, soup, and custard silk for the tongue when Lent has wrapped its hand over dairy. Color is flavor here. Cooks dye sauces green with parsley, gild custards with saffron, blush stews with sandalwood. A dish that does not look remarkable struggles to taste important. Sugar's architecture. It boils to a paste, becomes a wall, a turret, a peacock's tail. Subtleties, those edible riddles walk in between courses, a castle of marchpane, flying the host's badge, a saint molded in jelly that quivers as if breathing, a pie that releases live birds to the rafters and a shrieks of delighted fear. You can argue whether guests eat these wonders or merely applaud them. Either way, the message is swallowed whole. We command not only the field and the ledger, but color, scent, surprise. Smell the room as the procession begins. Resin from torches, rosemary bruised under a knife, pepper, that small black thunder rising from a pot of wine. Hear the chorus of labor pestles thudding almonds into cream, knives ticking against boards, ladles knocking the rims of copper. A sewer, the master of service, paces the passage, arranging the dance who sits by the salt, who receives the first carved slice, who must be noticed and who may be safely ignored. Nothing on the table is innocent. The salt cellar is a bright little fortress, high a status above it. Humble mouths below, white bread, trenches soft, clean. Rich with sifted wheat go to the top of the hall. Darker loaves descend the benches like a shadow. Etiquette is another fire to tend. Basins come round for hand washing, ewers gleaming as water arcs into bowls. The scent is rosemary again, to cut grease and mask the truth of kitchens. Knives are personal, men wear them at the belt, so carving becomes theater. A trained hand turning a swan into portions the size of favor. Forks, if they appear at all, are exotic little arguments. Fingers, clean and quick, do most of the work. Dishes are shared in messes of four. Generosity and appetite negotiate across a single platter. And friendship is measured in the size of the slice someone leaves for you. Taste is a clock with many hands. Lenten days crown fish, with invention sturgeon, where the crown permits. Herring, when distance and money refuse to cooperate. Pies of pike and lamprey cut in diamonds to show they are not meat. Non-fasting days thunder back with boar and venison. Cranes and geese. Capons in saffron broth. Beef simmered to velvet under a lid. Sauces hum with cinnamon, ginger, grains of paradise. Meat wears sweetness the way a lady wears silk, not because warmth is needed in the mouth, but because wealth needs witnesses. Wine is served spiced and steaming, then plain and cool. Then, if the night ripens, sweetened for a foreign envoy who will mention it favorably when the treaty is discussed tomorrow. Politics sits at table with its elbows on the board. Places are a map of the moment. The closer to the high table, the warmer the Lord's smile. The first cup sent to a guest is a public handshake. A dish withheld is a silence in italics. Under the music, the citerns and drums and harpers men murmur a manor ode. A daughter promised. A debt forgiven if the king's hunt passes through your wood this winter. The hall is so bright you could mistake it for a sky. The decisions are so quiet you could mistake them for prayer. Down below, the economy of spectacle leaves crumbs. Servants eat well by village standards thick stew. White bread crusts. A slice of beef shorn from a roast as it turns, but they eat last. When the platters return coy with grease. The poor crowd the gate on feast nights. Baskets of trenches and bones are passed out. In an act, equal parts mercy and display. Tomorrow, those trenches will feed dogs or beggars, will thicken pottage, will remember briefly that they sat near saffron. The ledger will note the charity in a hand that smiles wider than the steward's mouth. Not everything gilds perfectly. Spits, seas, and char. A sugar castle slides at the corner when a door slams. A cask turns, and the ale tastes unkind. The cook stares down disaster with the same composure he stares down his accounts. He salts, he thickens, he dies. In a world without thermometers, craft lives in personal weather the way a sauce looks when it has learned its lesson, the way a roast sounds when its juices begin to whisper toward the edge. Apprentices learn with their noses and knuckles. A lifetime of heat writes its letters on the backs of their hands. There are quieter rooms off the heat, a still room where herbs are coaxed into syrups and cordials mint. Fennel, hyssop, cures that double as flavors. A bakehouse where ovens blink like tired eyes and loaves go in by the dozen. A brew house where malt is its own landscape. In these spaces, the household becomes a little town, self-sufficient as long as wagons arrive on time, fish on Fridays, pepper at Michaelmas, honey in jars sealed with wax, hardest choices. A lord who can feed 300 for 3 days is a weather system. Everyone in the Shire feels the pressure. And still, after the trumpets and the subtleties and the gilded birds, someone stoops to gather the knives. Someone folds the stained napery so the worst of it is hidden from tomorrow's eyes. Someone rakes the ashes and coaxes the last embers into a small red cousin of the feast's furnace, the kind of glow you could cradle and call by name. The hall dims, candles gutter out like tired courtiers. What remains is breath and the scent of pepper braided through the smoke. If you stand here long enough, you see the hinge between worlds. In the cottage, food is a promise kept thin. In the castle, it is a language spoken loudly, but the grammar is shared. A pot simmers, a loaf cools. Hands wash before eating. A family counts on tomorrow. A lord counts heads. The kitchens differ in volume and in spice, in risk and in appetite, yet both are answering the same question the fire asks every day: whom shall we keep warm, and how shall we do it? Walk out past the cottage palings, and the smell of last night's smoke thins into air the tastes of earth and rain. The kitchen shrinks behind you. The field grows to fill the horizon. Here, supper begins as a furrow. Hooves thud. Leather creaks. Iron bites and lifts. A team of oxen leans into the yoke, broad backs swaying. Steam blooming from their noses, dragging a heavy plow that cuts the soil into long ridges, like waves frozen in motion. This, more than any gilded pie or spiced wine, is the heartbeat of medieval cooking. Without this hiss of blade through dirt, no pot would ever sing. Grain is king, but it is a needy monarch. Villages move by the grammar of the open field system, great sheets of land divided into narrow strips. Each family's allotments are scattered like cards across 3 great fields, one for autumn-sown wheat or rye, one for spring-sown barley, oats, or legumes, and one lying fallow to catch its breath. Rotation is not fashion, but insurance. Beans and peas hitch nitrogen back into the soil. Dung and muck are carted diligently to keep the earth from forgetting how to feed. You watch a cart tilt and spill a dark avalanche onto a field already patterned with hoofprints and boot scuffs, and see next winter's bread in that reek. The field is noisy in its own way. Sickles whisper against a straw when harvest comes. A hot shimmer of August pressing against shoulders. Flails will do the winter's work on the threshing floor, but now the work is cutting, binding, stacking, laughing when someone's cap slides off, cursing when the sky gathers a sulk and threatens rain. Women glean in the wake of the men, quick hands finding what the bundles missed. Children carry sheaves twice their height with a pride that makes them walk straighter. The right to glean is a threadbare kind of grace, but grace nonetheless, the law of custom sheltering hungry months. Some of the land's food walks on 4 legs. Pigs are released to pannage when the mast is heavy. Tide of acorns turning the forest floor to a feast. Their bellies will become winter's hams. Their fat, the candlelight the poor can afford. Sheep drowse and graze on the commons. It is their wool that spins coin, their mutton that appears in stews when age or fortune dictates culling. Cows low in the meadow, their milk turns to cheese and butter on kitchen boards that shine with use. Chickens scissor the yard for beetles, stuttering their soft commentary. Their eggs slide into Lenten custards and feast day pies alike. Even the dovecote hums white birds spiraling in a soft storm, its young a delicacy when meat is lean. There's fruit, too, where blossom luck holds. Orchards quilt the hill edges in spring and hang with apples in autumn. Pears sack the branches with their sweet weight. Baskets go to the press, and cider runs like a cheerful rumor, sharp and bright, a hedge against thirst and dull water. In cooler houses, apples lie layered in a straw, each one nestled like a promise. Gardens shoulder the fields with their own green arithmetic leeks, steady as soldiers, onions curing on ropes like braids, cabbages squatting like stubborn little saints, herbs crowding the path edges time, savory, rue, each leaf a small, fragrant argument against the tyranny of bland. The land is generous, and the land remembers every slight. Too much rain grain sprouts in the ear, rots in the shock, bread sours to despair, too little stalks rattle like bones, and the mill wheel turns only in dream. Everyone talks about weather the way a sailor talks about a tide that may not love him tomorrow. A good year brings ale foaming in jugs, and bacon hams swinging in rafters, and laughter that sits broader on faces. A bad year teaches the tongue the taste of acorns ground into meal, of peas pounded to thin bread, of porridge that apologizes for being mostly water. Famine is not a spectacle. It is a slow arithmetic done in bowls. Between field and loaf stands the mill. Watermills squint by rivers, windmills shrug their great arms on hills, grain comes in sacks, leaves as flour, and in between the miller takes his due. Honest or otherwise, stories make him sly because he lives at the hinge of hunger and profit. You hear the timber groan as the wheel turns, see flour drift like pale fog and cling to eyelids, taste grit on the back teeth when a millstone is worn thin. In barns, granaries rise on staddle stones so rats have farther to dare. Doors are barred against the thieving night. The harvest must be stretched like cloth, carefully, over a year that can snag and tear without warning. Work is a calendar. Plow and sow, weed and pray, reap and sing, thresh and count, bake and brew. Lammas brings the first loaves of the new wheat to church, a blessing with butter if the year is kind. Michaelmas geese hiss in their pens and then hiss no more. Fat roasts spin, and the bones are kept for broth. In Advent, the knives rest from red meat, and the kitchen thinks about fish. Candlemas comes, and the days tilt toward a light. Spent cabbages revive the pot. Lent requires ingenuity. Easter opens the larder a crack. The year is a necklace of fasts and feasts, each bead touching food. Kitchen work may be heat and patience, but field work is hope disciplined. Listen to winter's other music, the thud-thud of flails on a threshing floor polished by generations of feet. The winnowing song as chaff leaps and grain falls dense and golden into baskets. The barn smells of straw and mouse and the sweet metallic breath of grain. Out by the hedge, men mend harness and women mend sacks. A boy sharpens the sickles like a child drawing lines of light on stone. Even in snow, the work rehearses the months to come. The kitchen banks its fire, the field banks its strength. Quarrels live here, too. The commons must be guarded from greedy hooves. Hedges must be cut, not stolen. The reeve records who plowed late, who sent an ox when 8 were needed, and who sent excuses. Lords demand boon work extra days in their domain, and take tithes gathered into barns that smell of other people's labor. Yet the system is not only weight, it is also a scaffolding. Shared plow teams mean that a widow's field can still be turned. Common pasture means even a poor man's cow finds grass. The open fields are a braid of duty and defense. Stand at a ridge's crest and look down. where ridge and furrow lies like rips under a thin skin of green. Those waves shape water, draw it off from crops, and show centuries without a word. A plowman understands slope in his bones. He reads the land like a psalm. He knows the spot where the iron snags, where the soil is dark and forgiving, where it sulks and must be sweetened with marl. He knows the heft of a quoit-sized stone pulled from the furrow. He knows when to rest his beasts and praise them with a hand on the warm flank. Harvest Home is the village singing itself back together after the long, separate trudge of work. The last sheaf is bound with a ribbon and christened with ale, a straw figure, a little corn spirit. Joke and homage twined might ride atop the last wain. There's bread from the first bag ground, brown and springy. There's cheese that pretended nonchalance all summer. There's pork salted and smoked in time to add ferocity to a stew. Fiddles worry, cheerful tunes. Children run themselves flagrant. For a night, the year seems easy. Tomorrow, the counting begins. And beyond the village, farther even than the Lord's great hall, the fields tie you to strangers. Barley becomes ale in a town brewery. Fleece becomes cloth on a fulling mill's hammering beam. Surplus onions buy iron nails, which repair a gate that keeps a sow out of a field, that will grow the rye, that will be baked into the bread, that will be soaked in the pottage, that will be eaten by the hands that will sow again. The circle is not poetic, it is practical, and it is relentless. Every kitchen is, in the end, a distant echo of a blade in soil. Back in the cottage, the evidence of fields arrives humble but decisive. The pottage thickens, not because the fire adores you, but because the oats were kind and the beans obliging. The bread is dense or airy according to the week's milling and the month's weather. A sliver of bacon speaks fluent forest. A wedge of cheese tells you whether the meadow was wet or generous. Even the little indulgence, a spoon of honey, a few dried apples, shines with the exact sun that set over your village in September. To eat is to read a diary the land keeps without ink, and the risks they walk in with the food. A wet autumn invites ergot into the rye. A stale barn invites weevils into the grain. A spring frost pinches blossom, and winter is poorer for it. A lord raises dues, and a man sells his ox to keep his strips. Soil is not passive, it remembers care and neglect. A family that manures and rotates, that weeds and watches for blight, has pottage that tastes of prudence. A family that cannot too few hands. Too bad a year eats hope thinner each month and speaks more softly at the pot. When you turn toward the village again, the kitchen smoke looks different. It is no longer only warmth and cooking. It is the last transformation of a long chain of choices and accidents. Weather and will. The fields have been ladled into bowls. The earth has come indoors. The spoon lifting from a pot is therefore not only a tool, it is a small wooden blessing plucked from soil and season and shared breath. You taste the broth and find within it a ridgeline, a cart track, the shadow of a crow on a stubble, a woman's hand a scattering seed. The noble hall eats power and shows it. The monastery eats discipline and praise it. The road eats endurance and sings it. But the field eats faith and plants it. If you listen closely to the simmer of any medieval pot, you hear beneath onions, beneath barley, the quiet syllables of plow and rain. The kitchen may be the heart of the house, but the fields are the lungs of the year, drawing in weather and breathing out bread. Walk back through the gate, and you carry that breath with you into ladles, into loaves, into the hush before the first spoonful. Slip indoors from the window-scuffed fields and follow the faintest trail ink, glue, dust until you reach a quiet room where the world of smoke and stew becomes handwriting. A quill lifts and settles, nib whispering over scraped parchment. Beside the window, a clerk rules faint line in plummet. Across the table, a cook, with flour still whitening his knuckles, dictates in a voice that has shouted over cauldrons. Take hens, he begins, as if he were already mid-motion. Boil them, temper with almond milk, color with saffron, season with powdered deuce, and serve. No weights, no minutes, only verbs and certainties. Outside, kitchens roar. In here, they crystallize. By the late Middle Ages, recipes circulated like polite gossip among people who could afford both meat and manuscripts. Some were courtly collections, a king's household, codifying what its cooks already knew. Others were city-bred miscellanies for prosperous homes learning how to host with ambition. They were not instruction manuals for beginners so much as aide-memoire for trained hands. Seed, parboil, tempre. Let it be enough, these are directions for bodies that have learned the language of boil and browning, for noses that can tell when enough announces itself from the pot. Their priorities feel strange and charmingly frank. Flavor, yes, but also a spectacle. Color is a recipe's second grammar. A good custard must be gold as afternoon. A fish sauce can be made green with parsley, or turned red with a scrape of sandalwood. Turned sole may tip it to purple, a small miracle for a feast that wants to shimmer. The cook's palate is literal saffron threads crumbled between finger and thumb, verjuice brightening with a sour flick, rosewater ghosting through a sweet dish like memory. Sugar still a spice in these pages shows up not as comfort so much as philosophy, sweetness to harmonize heat, luxury to answer salt. Read long enough and the same habits recur. Little fingerprints of a time. Almond milk solves everything. It gives silk to sauces, stands in for dairy on fast days, turns broth into velvet without a drop of cow. Spices appear not singly, but as powders with personality, a powder deuce, gentle for cinnamon-forward warmth, powder fort, a strong for pepper's insistence. A note will say, cast thereon, and you can almost see the wrist snap over the esteem. Wine or ale is as common as water in these lines. Bread is not only eaten, but used to thicken. Crumb turned to structure. Not all of this lives in palaces. Urban households copy select dishes into notebooks, bills of fare, notes on pies that travel well, a sauce that flatters a modest roast. Somewhere in a townhouse, a husband composes an earnest manual for his young wife, half affection and half accountancy, which servants to trust, which herbs to dry, how much pepper justifies a Sunday brag but not a neighbor's envy. In monasteries, a brother lists fish preparations in a neat, ascetic hand, margins freckled with grease where the book sat too close to pot and ladle. The manuscripts wear their kitchen plainly as splashes, thumb smears, a corner scorched by a candle carried too low. You can hear the pages, to the soft thap as they're turned with flour-sticky fingers. The pause when a word from another language, an old French borrowing, a shy Latin makes the reader squint, puzzle, and then nod. Recipes travel in tongues. A dish marches from one court to another, trailed by its verbs. A city clerk translates as best he can and leaves the odd foreign word shining like a bead no one wants to lose. The traffic of food is wider than roads. Almonds and sugar come with ships. Ginger and cloves ride caravans to a market before they ever appear as a cast thereon in a margin. And everywhere, the blur between kitchen and physic, the feeble of a stomach are to be given chicken broth with fennel. Dishes are marked hot or cold by temperament, as if the pot itself could argue humors into truce. The same hand that notes the measure of saffron writes a little beside it, good for phlegm. What you eat is not only delight or duty, but remedy. A cook is healer by heat, a steward of balance as much as a supplier of fullness. The performances the books imagine are sometimes jokes with knives. Subtleties, little triumphs of deception appear as pages that smile to themselves, make mock eggs of almond paste with yolks colored, and set them in the shells, bake a pie, and within it put live birds to fly out when cut. The hall will gasp. The host will watch the gasp as carefully as any judge. But even when the dish is sincere, the recipe's picture entrance sauces glossed like silk, roasts redressed in feathers, custards stippled with gold leaf that clings to lips like a private boast. If you want numbers, you will not find them. Instead, you'll learn to think like a cook who must feed 50 or 200 without an hour hand to scold him. He knows the stages by sound, the first sharp boil that will cloud a broth if you let it gallop, the low, soughing simmer that coaxes marrow without stealing clarity. He knows by sight when a loaf is baked, by the crack of its crust, like a knuckle wrapped for attention. He knows by finger when a syrup threads between thumb and forefinger, sweet as strings catching the light. The manuscript trusts this body. It orders rather than proves. Copyists, too, leave their signatures. A rubricated title breathes red. A blue initial grows a stem of vines and a rabbit, for no reason other than joy. On a dull winter's day, someone inks a tiny ship in the gutter of a page that lists fish sauces, perhaps because the barrels came late that week and everyone grumbled. On some leaves, recipes clump like cousins 5 ways with capon, 3 with pike, as if a day's abundance pressed the scribe to gather variations while the taste still sat on his tongue. Elsewhere, the sequence is mysterious. A kitchen memory is stitched to a household prayer with only a faint seam between them. There's economy here as well as foil. Instructions assume thrift, yesterday's roast shredded into tomorrow's assops, broth clarified and used again, bones saved for third uses that would scandalize a modern stockpot. The books teach how to revive assaulted meats with a long soak and the patience of 2 boils, how to quiet a fish's stubborn salt with ale and herbs, how to force meat farcet so that the scraps aspire to delicacy. They give you travel food and fasting food, boisterous feast food, and the tender food of invalids, all in the same script, as if a life could be cooked whole on a dozen pages. And they mark hierarchy with a quiet candor. A sauce calling for ginger, sugar, and almonds assumes a purse that is smiles. A pie glossed with saffron says out loud what a family once whispered about them. A simple pottage with leeks and parsley nods to gardens anyone might tend. A cook reading knows what can cross down the ladder breadcrumbs thickening a broth, onions tamed slowly in fat, and what is to be saved for the rare guest when the household chooses to be larger than itself. What is most human, perhaps, are the smudges where practice corrected page. A margin hand adds more salt to a fish stew. Another crosses a word, writes verjuice better. Here a small finger trace has pulled saffron yellow into the space between lines. There a corner still smells faintly impossibly of clove when warmed beneath a lamp. The leaf is palimpsest of dinners, a stain you could map to one night when the cook's apprentice set the book too close, while the master tasted and said, again, more gentle powder. Sit with a manuscript laid open, and you will hear both kitchen and the scriptorium, double heartbeat. From one side, the clatter of knives, the shout for more wood, the hush that falls when a sauce finally marries instead of fighting itself. From the other, the scratch of quill, the soft exhale when a tricky passage yields to a word that almost means the thing you do with your hands. Between them, knowledge becoming memory, memory becoming inheritance. It is tempting to call these pages ancestors of the glossy volumes we shelve now, and they are, but the resemblance is deeper than lineage. The recipe's silences are an invitation to learn like the cooks they served by watching, by listening, by burning once and never again. Let it be enough is not a shrug. It is a trust, the kind that turns a reader into a practitioner and a kitchen into a place where yesterday teaches today without a scolding. Close the book carefully. Grease and gold have made their peace on the page. The ribbon mark falls where a pie waits to be colored to a fair yellow. Outside, the night leans against the shutters, and the house smells faintly of ink because you've been breathing near it. Tomorrow, someone else will open to a different leaf. A clerk will copy, a cook will astir, a young wife will trace a line with one careful nail. Words will make a bridge for flavors to walk across years. And somewhere, much later than any of them could imagine, you will read and taste and feel the tug of a world that trusted a spoon, a nose, a fire, and a few good verbs. Stand once more in the kitchen doorway where smoke thins into night. We have wandered through fields and cloisters, halls and harbors, warmed at 100 fires. The tour leaves a small, stubborn question behind. What did those medieval kitchens lay in the foundations of ours first? The ordinary miracles endured. Bread still steadies a table. The loaf that once rose in a village bakehouse now cools on a rack at home or waits behind a shop window. But the bargain is the same: grain, water, time, heat. We still knock a crust for the hollow answer. Stew still softens stubborn things into kindness. A pot that once kept barley and cabbage keeps lentils or beef and potatoes. And the comfort is unchanged, a slow mutter under the lid, a window misted with esteem, a room that smells like rest. Habits persisted too. The communal oven became the neighborhood bakery. The chalked mark in dough became a stamped paper bag. Gossip moved from the bench outside to the line at the till. We parade abundance differently. A lord once sent a peacock across the hall. We post a roast with potatoes and call friends. The grammar of welcome has new words, not new meaning. Theater survived, only gentler. Saffron still paints food gold. Parsley still freckles a sauce. Sugar still learns shapes. Medieval subtleties were carved and gilded. Today's surprises arrive as the smoke-filled domes. Edible soil, a beet that tastes like fruit. Both do the same work. A moment before eating, they widen eyes, then sharpen hunger, then invite a laugh. Recipes learned manners. where a scribe wrote, "Let it be enough." A book prints teaspoons, where a household handed down a gesture. A video shows it in close-up, yet the soul of instruction remains in the senses. You still lean in when the paper is silent, still listen for the change in a simmer, still trust the tug of dough more than the timer. The old verbs are at home under a stainless steel sieve. Temper, blanch, stew, preservation keeps whispering. Jars wink from shelves, crocks burble, the strings of smoked sausages perfume small shops. We pickle and cure for pleasure as much as necessity, and we honor time as an ingredient. Spices moved from vault to pantry pepper without ceremony, cinnamon in morning buns, ginger in tea. Some extravagances stay rare. Saffron glows in thrift, but the border between luxury and kitchen narrowed. That medieval duet of a sweet and savory plays on in holiday pies and glossy hams and fruit-studded sauces. Our palates recognize an old refrain. The calendar still flavors supper, meatless Fridays and Lenten abstinence, harvest festivals, Thanksgiving, and winter feasts still bind appetite to gratitude. Safety learned new speech. Smoke slipped out of roof holes once. Now vents hum and alarms object. The open hearth retreated into stoves that mind themselves. Knives still gleam, but handles fit hands. And oven mitts spare fingers where folded rags once failed. A modern kitchen is a calm apology to history's burns and soot. Roles shifted, yet labor remains. Once women bent to the coals while babies dozed on hips. Now kitchens fill with whoever loves the work or the eating. Still, someone stacks plates, someone scrubs pans, someone plans the list and stretches the budget. The scullion's rhythm survives in the clatter after dessert and the quiet heroism of wiping a counter while the last tea cools. Charity kitchens continue, not as monastic refectories, but as soup vans, community fridges, and neighbors ladling a stew in town halls when a storm or luck runs thin. Tools hold memory. A cast iron pan seasons like a story. A wooden spoon darkens at the tip the way others did in other hands. A mortar and pestle sits heavy and persuades you that some flavors are argued into being with patience rather than electricity, and the market still stages its little theater. The fishmonger calls, the baker stacks, the herb stall lashes the air with green. We flatter ourselves with choice, but the oldest rule still rules the season. Tomatoes sulk in winter. Berries speak truth for 6 weeks, and then they lie. Medieval cooks listened to the field. Our best meals do, too. If there is a grand lesson, it lives in small ones. Food is always double survival and ceremony, neighborliness and a strategy, medicine and mischief. A lord fed allies, a guild fed belonging, a monastery fed discipline, a cottage fed tomorrow's work. We do the same with different cutlery. Most history takes its daily shape not on thrones, but at tables over bread passed, cups refilled, quarrels mended, promises made across bowls that still steam. Think of the continuities of a sound. A knife meets a board with the old friendly knock. Water strikes hot iron and talks back. A lid lifts and the room leans to the first rich exhale. Children ask, "Is it ready?" in the same hopeful sing-song. Dogs still circle with the optimism of saints. A house feels less empty the instant onions meet fat. People knew that in 1350. We know it tonight. So the journey narrows to your house. The light is softer now. On the counter sits bread enough for morning. a wedge of cheese waiting for a late-night raid, a pot keeping a little heat as if it remembers company. The day has been fed by a stranger's farmers, millers, drivers, shopkeepers, and by old agreements between weather and soil, sea and road. You carry all that without noticing and make a ritual of setting down two bowls. Someone pours, someone slices, someone laughs. When the lamps go low, the past remains in the room. It takes a chair and says nothing. You can smell a faint sweetness of grain, as if from far-off malt. You can feel how a hearth asks people to draw closer. You can know, without sentimentality, that every kitchen is a small defense against the dark and a rehearsal for morning. Close the cupboard, bank the coals of an electric ring by turning it off. Hear the quiet settle. If tonight's gentle walk has done its work, your shoulders have loosened and your breath has found the deep. Even rhythm kitchens have practiced for 1,000 years. Let what you've learned lie down beside you, that food remembers, that labor dignifies, that plenty is best kept with others, that the oldest tools still fit a human hand. You do not need to keep the fire on. A drift between hunger and sleep is a good place to end. Good night. May your house hold its warmth, your bread keep its crumb, and your dreams carry the soft clatter of ladles and laughter from a hall you have visited and will visit again whenever you cook.